vote of a few that sit on this committee. You are in a position to serve the community, and I encourage you to talk and listen to them this time around. I've made copies for you to share of the petition that was started to gauge community interest in naming the pool in Jeff's honor. Please take the time to look this over and read the comments that were left. For those of you that never had the privilege to know Jeff, let the comments give you a glimpse into the impact he left on so many within this community. New England Swimming, an organization consisting of approximately 9,400 swimmers and 103 teams throughout Massachusetts, Rhode Island, New Hampshire, and Vermont, has already recognized Jeff's tremendous impact by creating the Jeff Johnson Developmental Coaches Award within months of his passing. Furthermore, the Eastern Massachusetts High School Swim Coaches Association has also created the Jeff Johnson North Boys Coach of the Year Award. While Jeff was active within both organizations, his service to the AB community was far greater. I understand the need to institute a three-year waiting period after a death or retirement and naming a facility in honor of someone. The rationale to wait is to ensure a decision is not made out of impulse or grief. However, whether it is 1 year, 3 years, or 10, there is no amount of time that will ever heal the hearts and lives of the countless number of people Jeff touched through his community service, coaching, mentorship, and friendship. It is time to recognize this amazing man and the impact he had on so many people in this community for over 45 years. This is more than a deserved honor, and I hope you all will take the time and effort to explore the interest and support from the AB community in naming the high school pool in Jeff Johnson's honor. Thank you.
I said I wouldn't respond, but I do want you to know that we've received, thank you for sharing and coming to the meeting from afar and sharing all your heartfelt thoughts about Jeff. And we've received many community members' emails imploring us to do the same this week. And I'll just let you know what I responded to all of them is that it just in order to follow what we have to do for open meeting law and everything, that it's on the agenda already for the March 10th. Right, policy meeting with the hopes that they'll bring it to the full school committee on at our next meeting at March 19th. Okay. Yeah, absolutely.
And petition's quite long. I made about 6 copies. Sorry. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Is there anyone else that wanted to come up and speak?
Hi, everyone. My name is Monica Burns, and I'm a 2004 graduate of AB. I was also on the swim team with Amy, and I came here tonight not from 500 miles away. I think that shows Amy's dedication, but I think about 30 miles. I'm from Malden, or I live in Malden now. I'm from Acton. And I can tell you it's not easy to get here during rush hour, but it wasn't even, I didn't think about it for 1 second. If I can be here and support naming the pool after Jeff and his memory of everything that he taught all of the swimmers and the skills that he gave us to develop in our careers and our lives, it was an easy decision. So thank you for considering this matter, and we hope to see that pool named after our hero and our educator and our coach someday soon. Thank you. Also, my dad's here. I don't think he's going to get up, but he's right here.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for coming and showing your support. All right, we have our student representative. Rishi, you'd like to come up?
As just mentioned by Ms. McKinley, my name is Rishi, and I am the student representative for the school committee. And so just for a quick update on what's going on at school, I think in general, people are doing well right now, but I think there's been a general uptick in stress levels because of upcoming AP exams in April and March, or May, and a spring tryouts about to happen. So a lot of kids that are trying out for baseball, volleyball, track are feeling a lot of stress. And with the coronavirus and fake news and different things spreading around, I think a lot of kids have started to become a bit scared. And I think the science department's doing a very good job of calming kids down, especially just for an example, my AP biology teacher has been guiding his students towards different sources where we can see what's actually going on, reliable sources where we can see what's actually going on and see where different cases are happening. Thank you.
Thank you, Rishi. All right. Peter, are you ready to give your update? I am. All right.
Well, first, good evening, everyone. Just a couple things. You'll notice there's a bunch of paper on the table in front of you tonight. Some of it is informational. I will, and I'm not going to steal Dave's thunder by going into the details of it, but you will see a press release from our treasurer, Margaret Dennehy, on the table. And you will also see the Standard & Poor's Ratings Direct, which is some light reading for you to take in, but it's really all good news, and Dave is going to talk about that a little bit later. We also, bless you, have a draft of the district newsletter, which is headed out the door tomorrow. There are a couple of numbers that I know I need to tweak in there. I just saw them and caught transposed numbers on something, but that will give you a sense of maybe a little bit more in-depth articles that we're working to actually share with our community about the work that's being done in the district. We do the regular superintendent's updates, but those are real quick updates and snapshots. This is intended to provide a little bit more information. So the work in this newsletter is focused around the district's efforts in diversity, equity, and inclusion, STEAM, and the work we did in the fall in STEAM, and then also an FY21 budget update for the community. So that will be going out. It's in digital format. We thought the budget update was timely because it is coming out ahead of town meeting as well, and an opportunity to make sure we're speaking to people. In terms of updates for tonight, I want to send a huge congratulations to our academic decathlon team at the high school. They won the state championship again, and they have qualified for the national tournament. It's a tremendous accomplishment for all of the students, and we also have a first-year coach that I want to give a shout-out to, in Josh Mishricki. So we are all very, very proud of that team. Another update, and I included some pictures in the updates that go out because sometimes a picture is worth 1,000 words, but we had our World Cultures Week at the high school this week. The week was led by our World Language Department, and over the course of the week-long celebration, students had an opportunity to participate in a variety of activities. I was able to go down for some Latin dancing, but then they had food tastings of some of the various cultures, art exhibitions, musical performances, cultural discussions, and we even had some of our high school students reading at the various elementary schools that we have in the district. The highlight of the week happened this morning when we had student panels that provided an opportunity for some of our students to tell their stories of their cultures to their peers. So I want to thank the World Language Department leader, does a tremendous amount of work in this, so thanks so much to Seneca Savikoski and all of the students and staff who supported all of the work over the course of the week. So you can check out a few pictures, but it was a tremendous achievement and accomplishment for our students to put that on. I also want to make our community aware that we have developed 2 new family resource pages on our website. One is to keep the community informed in a clear and concise way about the work we're doing around preparing for coronavirus. So that is prominently located with an icon right on the homepage of our website that people can get to. All of the communications we have as a district are in one place. We have multiple communications, and Dawn just did a blog post around racism and coronavirus because we think that's an important update for the community we want to keep people aware of. And a number of different, governmental resources that people can get to as well. And then the other website that we've launched is under the DEI page, and that is Talking with Kids about bias, hate, and more. And that will give families an opportunity to have resources where they can connect with their children about those topics. So we wanted to make sure we're providing a lot of resources for our families and communities in an easy-to-access fashion. So we'll be sending those links out to all of our families tomorrow. And then finally, I want to give yet another announcement. We have an evening Superintendent School Committee Chair Coffee with the community, which is being held next Tuesday night, March 10th, from 7 to 8:30 p.m. right here in the admin auditorium. We have received a number of questions already through the online form that we sent out, and we look forward to seeing everybody there, and hopefully we get even more community members coming. We've been averaging probably about 25 to 30 community members at each of the various coffees that we've had, which is really a fantastic turnout. So we're excited about that opportunity. And as we've gone through, we've really learned how to streamline the process, getting the questionnaire out ahead of time, being able to kind of post the questions so everyone sees exactly what questions were being asked and then responding to them, but then also offering an opportunity for the community to kind of talk in more depth about some of the other topics that come up during the course of the meeting. So That's it for me for tonight, and looking forward to the rest of the meeting.
Thank you. I wanted to follow up on the earlier comments about coronavirus. The assessment of risk and the allocation of resources are important activities for the school committee. I speak tonight to provide my perspective on the risks presented by the coronavirus, COVID-19, both with respect to our students and our community. This morning I saw an update that indicated that the mortality rate, according to the WHO, was 3.4%, which was followed by a discussion of how serious the coronavirus illness is. I was very angry. The 3.4% average is an aggregation of the experiences of young and old, men and women, individuals with access to good health care and with access to poor health care, as well as individuals with pre-existing conditions and those without pre-existing conditions. From the perspective of a school committee member and a father, I'm particularly concerned with our youngest students. Fortunately, an infection with COVID-19 is not serious for kindergarten, elementary, and secondary school-age students. In fact, while current deaths total more than 3,300 around the world, there is only a single death reported in a young person. Additionally, if infected, young people are much less likely to be symptomatic. To the extent we have concerns about our students, our concerns should relate to the ability of students to transmit disease to older people, not to how sick the students themselves are likely to become. The risk is very different for our community members in the Life Care Center of Acton. Assuming the age-related mortality rate for China is predictive of the U.S. mortality rate, the risk of death associated with COVID-19 infection is likely greater than 5% for persons over 70 years old. The high mortality experienced at the Life Care Center in Kirkland, Washington is suggestive that we should make plans to minimize the risk of infection in our elder population and these types of facilities. From the time my children were little, I told them I was afraid of cars because vehicular accidents kill more than 30,000 people every year. Today, tomorrow, and every day this year, 100 people will die in vehicle accidents in the United States. Residents of Acton, including students, have died in vehicular accidents. I encourage everyone to allocate more energy to this real and ongoing risk than to the much lower risks associated with COVID-19. I close with a caution about data aggregation. We must put an end to average. Discussions of averages tend to hide the real issues we face and prevent us from seeing the opportunities we have to improve our school district. Almost everything we care about is distributed over a range: hours of sleep, reading ability in the 3rd grade, empathy, and curiosity. Let our school committee deliberations reflect an appreciation of the range of our students' abilities and accomplishments, and let our actions be sensitive to the unique needs of our individual students.
Thanks, John. All right, we have a couple of presentations tonight. We have 2 schools here to present their school improvement plans. Just a reminder that the school improvement plans are the cumulative work of the school council at each school, which consists of parents, teachers, community members, as well as the principal and assistant principal. We're going to stick to the way of asking questions that I mentioned at our last meeting when we got out at 8:05. So I'm not planning on that happening again tonight, but I'll give everybody an initial question, and if I think that we have time, then we will go back and have additional questions. So don't waste your questions on Beyonce, John. All right, so first up, we're going to welcome Chris Whitbeck up to the mic.
Good evening. Thank you for having us. I'm Chris Whitbeck. I'm the principal of Douglas School, and this is Jenna Loreniga, my assistant principal. We'll be sharing the presentation tonight. We're going to talk about visible learning and social development. My staff asked me only to use the word fascinating once because they were tired of my excitement about this. So I would say that this has been riveting work. The idea that we presented last year was that we would delve into the work of John Hattie and his work on identifying the teaching practices that have the greatest impact on student learning. And so we did that last year. Just a refresher, Hattie does not use averages. He uses effect sizes, which are a fantastic statistical tool to look at large amounts of data. And so he looked at the research in education and the effectiveness of different teaching approaches and came up with an effect size for all of these different research studies. What he landed on was that an effect size of 0.4 or above is almost guaranteed to give at least a year's worth of growth, if not more, in any area. What's the top? Last year we shared this, and it is over double the effect size of 0.4, and that is collective teacher efficacy. Teachers working together in a very effective manner to identify how students are doing and what are the most effective means for teaching them. So it's groups of teachers, defining for students what success looks like, challenging them, giving them regular feedback based on their progress towards that success, and using assessment data to drive their decisions.
Can you hear it? Okay. Good evening. As Chris said, I'm Jenna Lorenaga. I'm the assistant principal. So that leaves us with the question of how do we get there? We focused on one specific area, narrative writing, to build collective teacher efficacy. Using the guiding principles from Hattie, we are developing teacher teams to analyze student writing and to engage in conversations around best student practices. We began by discovering how we assess writing. At our summer PD, we read and assessed a 5th grade writing piece. You would imagine that a group of 60 educators would come somewhat close to how they analyzed the piece of work. If you look at the pie chart there, you will notice that we had a big discrepancy where we had 43% agreement as to whether a student did not meet, was working toward, or had met a specific standard. In this case, it was for the topic of ideas in 5th grade narrative writing. So our goal was to get to 85% agreement. To get to 85%, we had to first determine what it means to be successful. We adapted the district rubrics, specifically for narrative writing, using the single point principle from our work in UDL, Universal Design for Learning. Our rubrics show what it means to be successful both in teacher language and in student language. What you see there is an example of writing that the teachers in a small group looked at together to determine exemplars for each standard in every grade, because we needed to know how we were going to use the rubrics in action. Developing these models of the exemplars and looking at the pieces led to some of the most incredibly rich conversations we've had as a staff. After collaboratively assessing student work, teachers and students develop learning goals together. Progress toward the goals will be measured. Teachers will discuss to meet best practice. If one strategy worked well for one teacher, others should be applying it. And this is collective teacher efficacy. Going forward, we will design a system for data collection so that teachers can easily see trends in student learning. Using the data, teachers will confer to determine the next best steps in instruction. Ultimately, we will collect data to show the impact we are having on student learning.
Another very exciting area that we have worked on this year is the social development of students. And this part really came from parents in the school. There were a number of parents whose children were making decisions that they didn't agree on, and they came to us and said, so, you know, why are our kids doing bad things? And can we get a group together to discuss that? And so we found this book after some recommendations, and it has some very, very, very interesting suggestions. So one of, and it really is based again on the research in moral development in children and adolescents. And one of the very fascinating things to me was that kindergartners, the majority of kindergartners in the research studies that were done, can tell you the difference between right and wrong. And that continues, that doesn't change as children go through school. And yet, some of the children choose not to do the right thing. And so the big question is why does that happen? Well, what we have up here are two of the major findings. One is the social pressures. The idea of identity and identity building goes hand in hand with moral development. And so if a student is not strong enough socially and emotionally and depends tremendously on the peer group, that statement of "I'll slide right back into the sea of dorks" is a very, very motivating statement for them. Also, the research shows that appreciation of others is perhaps the most effective means of preventing acts that hurt others, that are hurtful to others. So the author Weisbord divides the book into really 4 sections. That idea of the identity and the development of morality being together. A strong emotional background, being able to withstand disapproval as much as approval, appreciation for other students and adults, and something that we've been talking about within our school system, achievement. And if your identity is based on achievement and the feedback that you get is solely based on achievement, then, as he says, that leads to the dark side. It leads to a competitive nature that to not achieve is to fail, and to be a failure. So the author encourages us to be careful on the emphasis we put on achievement. So what have we done at Douglas? Besides meetings with teachers and parents, we have taken on a number of things. Our first was to create models of appreciation. And you could see these on our bulletin boards as you walk through the hall. They were large bulletin boards that modeled for students and adults how we appreciate one another and some background about adults in our building. So we had Appreciation Month for Mrs. Crooks, one of my administrative assistants, and people put up messages about what they appreciated about her. And we also put up information about Mrs. Crooks so that people knew more about her. At the same time, we gave the students moral dilemmas during our responsive classroom morning meetings. And the teachers and the students discussed what would happen, because one of the things that the author suggests is that we as adults, with our children or our students, as we are faced with decisions that we make, that we talk it through with our kids and express to them what are our values that we are struggling with. And so we did 7 or 8 of these moral dilemmas throughout the course of the year and got some very interesting responses. And then you know that something has really taken root when you don't plan it, and it just happens. And so as we went into our winter exhibitions this year, Jenna and I noticed that the work that the students were presenting to the parents and the community and each other were really focused in every grade on emotions, appreciation, and senses of self. So this has taken off in a way that we've never anticipated. In the spring, we plan to have more parent discussions following our book group and really help them delve into some of the research on moral development. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Does anyone have questions for Chris? Angie?
Thank you. And I really like this new strategy because I actually went back to the strategy plan that Peter presented last year. This plan actually focused on the engagement and relationship. So I really see that that's how it will work. My question is, do you expect this one will be able to enhance the third grade literature? Because last year we talked about like a benchmark. Do you think this plan will be able to enhance that, like a benchmark for the third grade literature?
I'm not sure exactly.
Because so I went back to the plan because last year we were talking about the third grade literature and the eighth grade math. That's kind of like a benchmark that we kind of look at the progress. So I was wondering if this plan will be able to help and as we assess the third grade literature.
The first part of our writing, is that what you're asking about? The first, yeah.
Just for some context for Chris, because I don't think he was here for that part of the discussion. So we had talked theoretically about setting some kind of key indicators for us as a district to be able to monitor. So we were keyed in on data. And the reference to kind of third grade literacy rates and eighth grade mathematics being kind of a key to upper level coursework, that's the context of it. But you weren't there for that, so I just, to give you a fair, fair shot at it.
So we will absolutely have a data set that gives us several points. Two being where students start out in their specific writing abilities, because there's so much that goes into literacy. But if we define just writing, we'll have a starting point, and we will have several measures as they move towards meeting a standard. And then we'll have that summative data of whether they've met the standard or not. So we'll have some data points to inform further discussion.
Yeah. I think just to add to that, one of the things Chris and Jenna looked at this year in terms of their MCAS work around the school was looking at student writing. And so I think that really drove a lot of the decisions around taking this on as the focus area. Is that?
Sure.
Yeah.
So I'm intrigued by the collective teacher efficacy. It looks like a tool or strategy, and I'll take all that for face value. What I see and really appreciate is that it looks like there's a lot of this fosters a lot of collaboration among teachers.
Yes.
And what I'm realizing is that I've always been in favor of collaboration. It's usually, when I think of it, it's more for exchange of ideas, but what I'm realizing in this context, it's also for consistency of grading and assessment and all that kind of stuff. So thanks for fostering that.
Thank you.
Because that was riveting, I want to ask a question about Rosie, but I'm not going to use my question on that. One of the things that I was very taken by is this idea that there's some ways in which parents were reaching out to you, and you decided that it was important to reach out to parents. So as we know, there's a finite amount of time to work on different things. So as you think about the amount of effort that's directed towards students and the amount of effort that's directed towards students through parents, how do you feel about the way that Douglas is allocating effort between those two things? And to the extent that maybe we should change that allocation, what are your thoughts?
I think we're limited by our access to individuals. So we have unlimited access to students. And teachers. So our work can be very powerful in those areas. I would love to have the magic bullet that would allow families to become more involved, and if I wanted to increase my efforts in a certain area, it would be with that work with parents from a very early age of their child through the elementary experience.
Thanks. I actually want to have a bit of a follow-up there, because I think this work around the moral mentoring is really interesting, and it was really great to see how you did some of that work and it immediately showed up in the exhibitions. I'm curious now, as in the spring, as you move towards engaging with the parents and the challenge that involves, what for you would be that measure of success? What kind of thing would you look for in the engagement with parents, and some sort of outcome, either planned or fortunate, like the exhibitions, would you use as a measure of success with engaging with the parent community on the moral mentoring?
I think my ultimate level of success would be for conversations that parents are having with children to filter back into the classroom. So if we can get a core group of parents who are using some of the methods and some of the activities that we've put together based on the book, and then in morning meeting, as we present more dilemmas or we present a next level of engagement in this, the more children say, well, when we were at dinner last night and we were talking about this, you know, that's not something we hear a tremendous amount about, and I think we have to be explicit as we meet with groups of parents that we are looking for certain things as levels of success. So it would be interactions that kids have with one another. It would be interactions that they have with their teacher and their groups. I think that those would be our strongest examples of success.
I'd also add that having a survey of the parents at the end of the year to learn from them where we were successful and where we weren't, to apply that for next year, would also provide us with some data points to move forward.
I really applaud your efforts in the first goal of coming up with some consensus around a rubric and a way to assess student work. I'm just curious how you see that sort of, you had a pretty big divide amongst teachers in terms of their agreement around what was meeting all of the standards. I'm curious how that then translates into teaching practices, because I imagine each of those groups maybe had some different teaching practices that led to different levels of work that they found to be successful and others that weren't. So I'm just curious how that will translate as you move forward.
Right. So one of the things that we've talked about as a teaching staff is that a student should be able to go to any one of our 3 grade level teachers and really have the same standards set for them and the same instructional levels. And so that's some of the work that we have yet to do. But we just had a staff meeting on Monday, and we gave a 4th grade selection of reading to all the teachers, and we were on some of the stands, and we used that single point rubric. So everybody had the rubric, everybody had the reading, and for some of the standards on that rubric, we were at 85%. And for others, we were closer to 65%. So we're moving in the right direction. And it was by no means, it was a piece of writing that was not clearly, one place or another. And so we're really pleased with the work. But there's a tremendous amount more to do. And then there are more genres of writing, many more genres of writing to do the work in, but it will be much quicker.
I really love the approach of focusing on developing appreciation and kindness, and I think that we've been talking a lot, and Peter's been talking a lot about, as a district, looking at emotional well-being in students and decreasing stress and helping children feel kind of loved and included at school. And I was wondering if you noticed, since you've started this, if there's been an impact on sort of the amount of peer conflict or behavioral issues or stress in your students, if you've seen that changing already, what the impact has been in that way.
Go ahead.
I think it's fair to say that we have seen an impact. We haven't measured it yet. We're having conversations around what it will eventually look like and what it should eventually sound like with an increased appreciation and with an increased focus on kindness. In third grade, we're doing a measure of how they recognize each other and how they can appreciate each other, and we're taking data on how that is impacting them in their classrooms. So I think given time as we move forward, that will be a focus.
Thank you so much, Chris. No, we're going to move on to the next one. We really appreciate all the hard work. That was wonderful. Thank you. Now I'd like to welcome up Dana and your team of whoever wants to come up to the table with you. You guys can sit in the back. We'll watch you wave.
Good evening, school committee, district administrators, staff members that are here tonight, members of the community. I'm Dana Labb, principal of Blanchard Memorial School. I'd like to introduce the Blanchard School Council members representing both Acton and Boxborough and thank them for their efforts in preparing this presentation. And we have a large number of them there tonight. If you could just stand so that you could be recognized, please. Our community representative is John Fallon from Boxborough. Our family representatives are Megan Connor from Boxborough, Kelly Sterniolo from Boxborough, and Alyssa Weiss from Acton, who is not here this evening. Our staff representatives are Karen Crockett, Lauren Grady, who also serves as co-chair, and Margaret Ingham. And finally, last but not least, our assistant principal, Lee Whiting-Jones, who serves as our secretary and ad hoc member.
So first, we want to recognize that all of our school improvement efforts take place within the context of our broader school and district communities. So our district values of wellness, equity, and engagement inform our school values of support, teamwork, attitude, responsibility, and respect. Our priorities, as outlined in our school improvement plan, were designed to mirror the ongoing work of the district as a whole. The stories and personal experiences of the people who make up our community also inform our efforts. Community is the hashtag that we've created to highlight this as our theme for the year on social media. The goal for our presentation today is to highlight the ways in which all of this work is interconnected. So we hope to leave you with an understanding of the ways in which our spheres of influence overlap and the degree to which our efforts so far this year toward our school improvement goals have reinforced and reiterated our common purpose and mission.
Our three goal areas this year are social emotional learning, curriculum, and equity and culture. As in years past, we have framed each goal in the context of students, staff, and families in order to reflect the diverse range of individuals and experiences in our schools.
A major focus of our social emotional work has been to implement practices that build a healthy, supportive environment in which all children learn. Staff have continued successful practices from the 2018-2019 school year to create shared language for behavior and expectations around the school. Currently, 92% of our students are participating in regular community building structures, such as morning meeting and advisory. We have noticed the impact on our student community through two major data points. On our Positive Behavior Interventions and Supports, PBIS survey, students articulated a strong sense of school connectedness and a connection to our school-wide values. Additionally, we have seen a significant decrease in office referrals for behavior during the 2019-2020 school year so far. For the remainder of the school year, our PBIS team is working to design and implement a series of social-emotional lessons for all classrooms that teach anti-bullying language and strategies, and we just launched that project this morning at community meeting.
As a staff, we are continually looking at research and recommendations in the field to refine and improve our practices. We have embedded social-emotional learning into our ongoing professional development. Our PBIS team has given updates and recommendations at our monthly staff meetings, and 40% of our staff is engaged in a year-long book study of the behavior code through building-based professional learning, and many staff, including all classroom assistants, have been trained in restorative practices. As part of the district-wide evaluation work, building administrators have emphasized teaching all students in our classroom observations and worked to coach teachers on classroom structures and routines. We've continued our efforts to collect and analyze data about social-emotional learning by keeping track of students who are receiving tiered SEL interventions focused on evidence of student learning in monthly team meetings and sharing student survey data with staff.
For the families in our community, we have focused our efforts on providing social-emotional learning resources and supports. We have continued effective practices from the past and refined them to meet the needs of our current families. We hold monthly community coffees to answer questions, many of which are about students' SEL needs and ways families can create routines and structures at home that build a common language with school. We continue to experiment with the format for these forums. Our most recent coffee was a structured dialogue about race and culture in our school. We provide updates on teaching and learning with an emphasis on social-emotional learning through our bi-monthly newsletters, the Paw Print and the Bulldog Barks. We are also using restorative practices to ground our conversations with families when conflict or student discipline issues arise.
Students are taking an active role in setting and reflecting on their progress in order to set a path alongside their teachers. Choice time is built into the literacy block in kindergarten through first grade, and students in 5th and 6th grade are goal setting and self-monitoring through reflections and rubrics. An example of this is from our music teacher and chorus director, Margie Callahan. Following their winter concerts, chorus students took time to discuss how they felt about their performances. They were then asked to fill out an index card with one glow and one grow. Here are some of their responses. Glows. I think it was amazing how everyone got almost everything right. I'm proud of staying focused, and I'm looking forward to the Big Sing and Pan Choral concerts. Grows. I think we should be working on blending more. We should work on looking at the conductor more and not at what's happening in the audiences.
So teachers continue to enthusiastically partake in robust professional learning experiences. Similar to students, voice and choice extends to staff as they have had opportunities to choose a topic and text that aligns with their professional practice and interests. Sessions this year combined a book study with an opportunity to share our learning together with the whole group. Our professional learning tracks this year were based on feedback from our spring survey and included social emotional learning, outdoor education, race, equity, and culture, math, teaching and learning, literacy, teaching and learning, co-teaching, and even an opportunity to choose your own adventure. New to our team this year is STEM coach Courtney Philbin, who works collaboratively with teachers to refine instructional practices. She also supports building-wide efforts to examine data and provide tiered supports for students. Blanchard continues utilizing the MTSS framework to provide interventions and support. Grade levels meet monthly with specialists and administrators to discuss evidence of student learning and plan instructional approaches. During meetings, staff focus on student learning objectives that support the district focus on teaching all students. Blanchard also continues to meet as a math committee to share problems of practice and support one another. To connect with district visioning work, Blanchard has also created a literacy committee this year with the purpose of calibrating and aligning literacy teaching practices, reflecting on what is working and areas where we can improve.
Blanchard families receive regular communication about instructional resources and materials in many formats. The Paw Print and the Bulldog Barks include information and resources from classrooms, specialists, administrators, and service providers. Additionally, staff members provide opportunities for families to be involved through digital communication tools, electronic portfolios, and surveys. Blanchard's website now reflects a school-wide approach to teaching and learning, complete with curriculum resources and information. Staff are also focused on two-way face-to-face dialogue with families. In some grades, students lead portfolio-based family conferences, and departmentalized teams, both in 5th and 6th grade, conduct conferences together in order to create a unified approach with families.
Our overarching equity goal is a visionary one. Our school will welcome and include all members of our community and provide opportunities for active participation and engagement. We believe this begins with cultivating the habits of reflection, empathy, and kindness in our students. Our community meetings this year have provided a platform for students to share about their culture and traditions and to learn from others. We've worked collaboratively with the PTF and with the Teaching and Learning Department to diversify the libraries in each classroom so that all children can have access to literature that provides windows, mirrors, and sliding glass doors to the experiences of others. This is also done less formally through cross-grade Star Buddy activities where students build relationships with children in different grade levels.
Staff have been working to examine our teaching practices and create culturally inclusive learning opportunities for students. Many grade levels have curated projects that have students research and share about their aspects of their identity. Teachers have also invited more and more families into classrooms to share about traditions and cultural celebrations. We believe that teaching all students the language, norms, and expectations of school creates equitable access to the unwritten curriculum in schools. Our PBIS efforts support this belief. Finally, we have been engaging in formal and informal conversations as a faculty about implicit bias, identity, and inclusive practices. This work is not limited to a single year's school improvement plan and will certainly be ongoing as the district as a whole shines a light on the ways in which culture informs teaching and learning.
Our hope for families is that they can all feel as though they have opportunities to share about their background, build connections with one another, and explore equity and culture through school activities and celebrations. Like culturally inclusive teaching and learning, our efforts to engage families in our school community is ongoing and evolving. 3 highlights of our efforts this year are a PTF book club using Sonia Sotomayor's Just Ask to open dialogue about differences, which we structured this year based on feedback from our family book groups last year, where families articulated they wanted a book club where children could be involved. So second is our February Community Coffee Forum focused on race and culture in our community, and our upcoming annual Festival of Cultures to celebrate the diversity of our community, where families host tables representing a country, region, or culture, and provide activities, food, and performances.
While we are certainly proud of the progress we have made so far in each goal area, there still is work to be done. Our overarching goals connect to authentic needs in our community and have been reinforced by our experiences this year. Moving forward, we will work to refine and streamline our efforts. Recognizing that meaningful learning cannot take place without a foundation of strong relationships, we would like to focus on making our students, staff, and families feel included in our community through robust social-emotional learning and equity and culture initiatives, using our curriculum as a conduit for connection. Thank you. Do you have any questions?
Actually, if you could go back to the slides that shows that the choices for different grades.
Michael, just let me know when I get the right one.
Oh yeah, here we go.
That one?
Yeah, here we go. So you have the because you show the choices for K to 1 and then choices for 5 to 6. So what are the choices for other grades?
Let me talk a little bit about that. Okay, so one example is in our 6th grade ELA class, English Language Arts. Students recently had the opportunity to conduct a nonfiction research project. So they were building upon the skills that they had learned in 5th grade, so learning about features of informational text, and really starting to understand that all writing has some kind of purpose or intention or author's message. And so they researched about a nonfiction topic of their choosing, and were very intentional about what their message was in communicating about the topic that they researched. So for example, one student researched polar bears, but their author's message, the focus for their piece, was that it's important to preserve the ecosystems in which polar bears live so that they don't go extinct. So those writing pieces were all on different topics. Students had a lot of autonomy, so there was some modeling in the class. The teacher modeled a piece of writing and then gave students really free rein to choose topics that they were interested in. So the ELA teacher, Mr. Maycumber, worked collaboratively with Carrie Cusick, our reading specialist, and with Connie Long, our librarian, to gather materials and resources that would fulfill the needs of all the different research projects. And then at the end of that project, they created a library of informational text, which is out in the hallway, and other students can borrow and read the materials that they created. So that's kind of going deep on one example. Did that answer your question, or would you like to hear more?
I think I'm more, because I know that you have this choice of reading and writing topics for fifth grade and the 6th grade, right? So what about the 4th grade, 3rd grade, 2nd grade? So it's like, because, it's something missing here. So that's what were my questions.
Is it okay if Lauren Grady, she would like to
The 2nd grade teacher.
I'm a 2nd grade teacher, and right now we're in the middle of doing research on mammals. Okay, so I'm a 2nd grade teacher, and right now the students are all researching a mammal and how they adapt in the winter. And the students had choices of which mammal, local mammal, that they could write about. They also have different ways of presenting it. So some of them might be doing a magazine, some of them are doing reports. They have some must-haves of what they have to have in this for nonfiction text features. But there's also features of other things that they might want to add to it. They might want diagrams, they might want maps, they might want some type of chart. The other thing that we do in our classes is we give them choices of books, so very similar to what some of the other grades. And when we're doing math, oftentimes we have them choices of math games that attack the same concept. So that's just an example. And 3rd and 4th do the same thing. 4th grade, are they still doing the regions in the United States? They do different states that they research and learn about. So we all do some biographies in 3rd grade where they're learning about a person that they choose to learn about. So there's a lot of choice in all grade levels.
No, Michael, this is meant to be like an overview of everything, not like a deep dive. Diane?
Thank you. Can you tell us more about how you're translating restorative practices into your school?
Yes, so we went to a training, Lee and I went to a training this summer, and we took an assistant with us who works very closely at all lunches and recesses. And so how it initially came about was we started training staff in August. We took them through a restorative circle and gave them the experience of what that was like in framing a conversation. How Lee and I have been using it is when we approach students, when we look at an instance of harm that's being done to another student, we utilize that opportunity to frame a conversation. And it also works well with responsive classroom and morning meetings in that format. We've also done restorative chats with assistants. So when we have the assistants meeting once a month, it's a time for us to have a conversation around how they can utilize those resources in order to have a conversation in the moment with students and help repair harm. And we have cue cards that take them through the questions that they might ask someone in order to work through that process. And that has parlayed into our work with families as well. So we typically do a community coffee similar format where we ask for questions ahead of time or a problem of practice. And what we decided to do this month was in response to topics around equity and race. We wanted to have a conversation that allowed voice and an opportunity to have structure around that. So it's a very structured routine with elements to it that allow for voice and give everybody an opportunity to speak. And we're able to frame that around a question that everybody's able to participate in. So as we start to work towards that, having that experience has been really powerful for folks. We think that's a great way for us to help support that work down the road.
It's not a question, it's more, I like that you're including families in the approach, because sometimes I wonder if families think that, you know, once the kids are in school, there's a black box and you know, there's no need to know what goes on inside. But I think that the school is just a hub for the community, and to open the doors and open the windows and let everyone kind of feel like they're a participant in the process, I think that's very helpful in building community. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
It's obviously very difficult to understand how successful we're being in terms of developing, you know, acceptable, you know, behaviors around race and gender and cultural diversity. But one opportunity to observe, you know, the progress that we're making or not making is to look at the behavior of children on the playground or in the cafeteria in terms of the composition of the groups and the fluidity of the groups. From your observations in those contexts, how do you feel we're doing?
Go ahead. Yep, go ahead. No, I'll share an experience.
I mean, I think Blanchard has the unique experience of having a demographic makeup that really mirrors our local community. And so in terms of what we've seen in relationships in classrooms and then in less structured settings, we see a lot of fluidity in terms of cultural background and race, gender. Our teachers provide a lot of opportunities for children to connect. So that really happens throughout the day, whether it's through morning meeting or going on a hike together in the woods or engaging in a mindfulness practice or playing a silly game or reading a story or engaging in a deep learning experience. We really focus on community first. And so when our children engage with each other on the playground, they have a foundation of some common experiences with one another. And my findings in navigating conversations with students when conflict or harm does arise is that most often it's between children who don't really know each other very well. And using restorative practices as a pillar for those conversations has actually been really helpful because it draws people closer together when you have a conversation together. And so we've really been working with families to move away from the thinking of jumping to separating children immediately or just taking space as the only option. There are times when that's very appropriate, but we've tried to model leaning in with curiosity and trying to come away with a better relationship.
Just to add to that too, students are curious about skin color and hair types and the things that they see in their friends. And so we want to help to develop a language for them so that they can ask those questions and have those conversations. And a great way to do that is similar to the work we're doing around bullying, is in order to provide the language, use literature as a conduit for that too. So Lee and I actually just met with a family yesterday to start having those discussions about how we can frame the conversation to help support young students, because they want to have those conversations, and so how we can help support them as educators in having those conversations, which again, as Lee stated, it will make those connections stronger.
All right, looks like you're good. Thank you so much. All right. Is Aaron coming up for this? Okay, all right. Item 3.2 is the Lower Fields Annual Report. Welcome Aaron Batez up.
I'm not taking any of that personally. Bye, everyone. All right. Well, thank you for having me here tonight. I'm pleased to give an update on the Lower Fields facility. And I should say I'm representing all of the people who brought the project to where it is tonight. I'm presenting tonight because it's Living at Community Ed in our role as the department that handles use of school facilities. But the fact that it's here today and the condition in which it's here is really to the credit of many members of our community who've worked really hard on this over the last probably 10 years, as well as our facility staff, our finance staff, and everybody. So it's a great news story that came from the community to where it is today. If any of you, I know John was here back in the day when this all happened, but for folks who might not be familiar with what we mean when we talk about the Lower Turfs facility, it's you can see the lights through the trees out there, and it's two artificial turf fields, a reconditioned and expanded grass field adjacent to them, and then an enlarged parking lot, which has been wonderful for lots of reasons, as well as a bathroom and snack facility. In the top right-hand part of that photo, you'll see the T.J. O'Grady Skate Park. The town of Acton actually owns and operates that portion of the site, as well as they own a couple of the parking spots most adjacent to it. And so when we undertook this project back in 2012, it was a partnership between the district and the town in terms of redoing that whole area with their partnership. And they've benefited as well from the amenities that have come forward. I went back to a presentation we made in 2012 I figured John might do the same and say to me, well, this is what you said then, and tell us what happened now. So the goals of the project and the kinds of things that the members of the community brought to us have essentially all been realized, which is a wonderful thing to be able to say when you come here tonight. The improvement to our athletic facilities is tremendous with the turf fields. It's much safer for the users. We don't have soft, squishy grass and debatable conditions out there. We tremendously have expanded usable hours of the facility, and I'll show you a slide later on that kind of delineates that. And one of the issues was, I think at the time, you know, the town was trying to decide whether or not we build more fields around the community. There was talk about doing them on Concord Road or other places, and by using this existing facility and increasing its capacity, they were able to, you know, as a community, we didn't have to invest in that same way in other places. We were able to get more use out of the fields we already had. One of the great things that came about for the school district was that by taking the energy and enthusiasm and the contacts of the folks from AB Youth Soccer and some of the other groups in town, we really benefited from that in terms of them bringing all of that to our front doors and helping us create this project. And then finally, the whole design was that the rental revenue that, quite frankly, the fall people, the ABYS with the connections they had in the soccer world and lacrosse world, really helped finance the project. And we can get into that a little bit more. But again, it really came from an outside group of committed members of the community. The project cost at the time was $3 million. That's about where it landed. I don't have an end of project cost accounting, so to speak, but it's very, very close to what happened. And the sources, if you take a look at that, really showed the three legs of the stool, I remember them liking to say. ABYS took out a private loan, a bank loan. It was actually about $1.1 million in the end. The district put up some capital money for design work and other things, and we also took out a bond. And then youth groups who are members of FALF, so that's people like AB Youth Soccer, AB Pop Warner, AB Lacrosse, and AB Girls Youth Lacrosse, I think are the key. Each put in capital contributions as part to help the ball get rolling, a little sport pun, and get the project where it needed to be. To date, I'll just go back to say, as of today, ABOS paid off its loan in November. It was a 10-year note, and they paid it off in about 7.5 years with their hard work. There was a memorandum of understanding that was executed at the time between the school district, AB Youth Soccer, and the Friends of the Lower Field, those three entities. And as part of that agreement, the way the monies would be used when they came in was first to pay back FALF's loan, ABYS's loan. Second, contributions were made to help support the district's bond payments. And I understand that that was a suggestion made by remember Mr. Peterson back in the day. FOF has also contributed money over the years to regular operating expenses that the district has incurred, as well as other kinds of things like when new nets are needed or turf infill pieces are needed. They've also kind of stepped up and contributed beyond what the MOU specifically required of them. So at this time, with the loan paid off, the next thing FOF is settling out is the capital contributions put into the project by those youth leagues are due to be paid back to them. They do have that money on hand and are working through the process of finalizing that bit. And now, at this point, all of the functions for the site have been turned over to Community Ed. We are now handling the rentals to both long-term contracted users and then ad hoc users who, I checked when I came in that the lights were on because I literally turned the lights on for all of them now. So we're in the trenches on this thing, but it's going very well. One of the interesting things that we're looking to do in the phase 2, the post-loan period of this project, is to see how we can take revenues generated from rent to help support the operating costs and hopefully a future replacement of the turf fields. So to give you a sense of some of the costs that are now going to be paid out of Community Ed from these revenues, this isn't a holistic list or not a complete list, but it gives you a sense of some of the kinds of things the district has been taking on in these past 7.5 years that will now be able to be paid out from the revenues since they aren't needed to pay back the loan. The average of the revenues, you'll see those come to about $127,000, I think. The average rental revenues have been about $190,000 a year. So that gives us an opportunity to start setting aside monies for the turf replacement, which we think will be maybe 8 to 10 years down the road if all goes well. That number is, it's a number to get us going. It's not something we can set in stone per se, because a lot of things have changed since this field was built. There are a lot more turf fields out there that are being rented. Some of our long-term contracted tenants have either gone elsewhere, built their own facilities, or don't exist anymore 7.5 years later. There was also an agreement in the original MOU that the youth leagues would contribute annually in rent in terms of almost like a head tax per player that they had. The idea being that when the bank loan was paid, that we would all get together and look at that and see if we could work out something that both enables the facility to operate well, but also takes into consideration these are community-based nonprofits, and so that's something we'll be looking at going forward. So in terms of those percentages of how the monies have come in, I thought it was informative. I don't think it'll be consistent necessarily, but we still do get calls a lot. We've done quite a few rentals in the time that we have. So there certainly will be revenue coming. This is a really interesting slide, I think, because of the fact that one of the important aspects of going forward with this project was, increasing the amount of usable field time. And just an analysis I did for the youth leagues recently of before we had the turfs and the lights and the great conditions, and now today, you'll see that on any weeknight, we've doubled or even more the number of hours or the amount of time that's available for the fields to be used. And what's nice is because of their location, having lights doesn't really affect folks the way it might on Elm Street or some of the other places in town where I know lit fields can be a concern for neighbors. It's a really great location for that. I checked on the fall, I was trying to compare, and we literally did not have any weeknight use in the fall after because it's dark too early. So, we probably get 3 hours a night of essentially brand new time for whether it's the schools, perhaps it's usually community users, but it's just a tremendous resource and it's really benefited both the schools and our teams and our phys ed classes who go out there during the day, the marching band who goes out there, as well as members of the community. The next steps down the road, the Memorandum of Understanding that we executed in 2012 has bank loan time requirements and then things that will happen when the loan is paid off. One of that is that a new Lower Fields Committee will be set up by the superintendent. Peter did put together a first effort at that in January, but based upon feedback from some of the youth leagues, we're going to revisit the makeup of that committee and probably work out a new idea for that new membership and revise the MOU. As I said, Community Ed now is stepping in to take over that day-to-day management of renting and operating the facilities, and we get a lot of help from JD Head and his department and the folks over there. And then again, really one of our long-term goals now is to make sure that we start saving for that turf replacement, which estimates today, and who knows what it'll be then, but could be around $750,000 to do that. So that's a significant undertaking down the road. So I'd be happy to answer any questions anyone has.
I have a couple questions, actually. One is that just this slide. What's the purpose to set up this, the lower fields committee after the loan was paid off? Is it like to, try to find the strategy for increase the revenue, or what's the, purpose to set up this committee?
The memorandum of understanding isn't explicit in a lot of things that the Lower Fields Committee will be doing. I think the two main things that I see as the focus will be, one, to determine what the youth leagues will contribute, how that will look in the post-loan period. And number two is, these are popular fields, and we have multiple groups vying for prime hours. And so it does say that Lower Fields Committee will be the arbiter of those kinds of discussions. So essentially the school gets the time that they need, but in those non-school hours, if we have multiple groups wanting them, so for instance, 6 to 7:30, everybody wants to have kids practice. It's a great time. That's one of the functions of the Lower Fields Committee, to kind of be the body that makes those decisions.
Okay,
So Michael, before you ask another question, I don't think that you were here in the beginning of the meeting where I said that I wanted to make sure that everybody had an opportunity to ask one question, and then if we had time, I would go back around. So hold on one sec. Paul?
So in the summer, I go by and I go through the fields and all this stuff, and it's very hot. And I'm wondering, and this is just a pet peeve of mine, if there's anything we could do to plant some shade trees just to get some relief from the sun.
I don't know about that. I guess what I'd say, Paul, is, certainly we talked to JD about how that might be possible or what the impact might be. There's a lot of infrastructure in the ground around the field, so that's out of my area of expertise, but even just having an area, I know people huddle under the snack shack overhang quite a bit, and you'll see that use is not heavy in the hot hours of the day, but in the evening it's great, when there are people out there. Same in Leary, we don't get a lot of action, or ComEd tends to get those hours in the summer.
Paul, I would defer to the famous line one of my contractors once told me, that I can do anything for time and money. Yeah.
What is the possibility for the club? Like high school, they have called like Frisbee, to use the place.
I think that we do have long-term contracts in place for certain hours for the next several years, and that impacts our ability to adjust the time on the field. So the priority has been to let the groups who helped create it get time after those contracts. There are some small pockets of time on weekends available right now, and I think they'd be open, and I think this could be part of our conversation. With the change of school start times and everything pushed back a little bit later, that's certainly something Steve Martin would like to talk about down the road. We are hemmed in by a lot of those contracts that start at a certain time, and so it only gives certain windows. But all of these will be part of what I think the Lower Fields Committee will talk about. And on that committee, there will be representatives of the youth leagues, presumably, as well as from the district. The athletic director would be someone on there, I'm sure, and some other folks. So that'll be part of that conversation.
I wanted to second Erin's early comment that she really has the biggest audience behind her, that so many people worked so diligently on this. But with respect to the future of the fields and trying to balance the many interests that compete for the fields, when they were built originally, a lot of the argument was really during the school day they weren't that important. They weren't really a critical feature to the school. My understanding is that as the fields have actually been used, people said, wow, that was actually a very good addition to the school. So in terms of looking at how we would see them relative to the rest of the school facilities, I think it would be helpful to revisit that, because if you look at the other facilities, we have the gym starts out, we use it for all of our school things, then there's some extra time, and community ed does things with it. This is really sort of the opposite of that. We really built the fields for the community and special groups in the community, and then the school said, well, now that they're there, the band will go march and these other things. And then I think the other thing that's important from my perspective is that it's fantastic that we've generated revenue. It would be great if we could forego all revenue. But if I look at the rest of the pressures on our budgets, and obviously ultimately the need to replace the turf, that simply isn't on the table. So it really is a question of balancing revenue generating things and other interests. So I hope that when the committee is reconstituted, both, we'll take a hard look at how the fields are really being used, and then people will be realistic about the need to meet these various things, including to generate revenue.
John, to that point, I had a dream that when the loan was paid off, that ComEd would have this excellent soccer league in the fall, like our winter basketball league, and then I got a reality check when I started being the one that there really is, the time is precious and there are priorities, and that would be a lovely thing to have, but maybe someday, maybe someday.
Just one point to add to Erin's response on that, John. In terms of revenue stream, we have had some of the conversations with the individual groups and just talked through revenue and the expenses that we know we have. And kind of initially, one of the things that we've talked about internally at the district level is the need to take a look at what the operating expenses are, but then talk about kind of longer term liabilities. And from a strategic standpoint, having established the stabilization fund, I think we actually have a mechanism potentially to direct some of the revenues that might come into a stabilization fund that is designated for replacement of turf.
I really have a comment and an observation, which is this is an excellent example of a public-private partnership where we identified a need and we worked with a private organization, being some of the community groups, and us as a public organization to meet that need. And I think as we begin to look at the capital landscape and master plan of the district moving forward, and we've got that on our radar for capital planning, to continue to look at additional opportunities for another type of partnership like this, which is beneficial both to the district and to the community as a whole. So I think that this is a great sort of lighthouse example of what we can do, and I think that we should keep our eyes and ears open to those future opportunities as we begin to look at the next sort of cycle of master planning for the district.
I'll continue to put it out that I would love for someone in the community to come forward and think about the West Acton Boardwalk and how we can improve that and make it truly a community walking area, along with the Douglas Gates project. I know we have a limited budget to what we can do to rebuild that bridge, but I think that bridge could provide some tremendous opportunities for something like that.
Michael, did you want to ask a second question?
Yeah, so because we are having loan, because we are looking into that post-loan committee as well. So my question is that, when are we going to pay off this loan?
The district's bond, you mean?
The bond. I think you mentioned that ABYS loan was paid off, right?
Yes, ABYS.
So the bond, right now, it's only the bond, right?
Right.
So what's the mature?
It was a 15-year note, I believe, or 15-year bond, and so I think $660,000 has been paid with the balance of the $1.5 million, and I'm looking at the finance director on that. Yeah.
Oh, because so $1.5 million is the principal that left to pay off.
No, the original principal of the district.
So when are we going to pay off this?
So it's a 15-year from 2012. I think it's 2027. Yeah.
Thank you, Erin.
You're welcome.
All right, we have minutes from the previous two school committee meetings of February 6th and February 13th that should be voted separately on your table. Each of the
you look there's
Any discussion on that? Any discussion? All those in favor? Oh,
As
sorry.
amended, it was as amended.
Okay, as amended. Any discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, those pass unanimously too. Okay. This is what I couldn't print out. All right. This is Peter's Superintendent Mid-Cycle Goal Review. This is an opportunity for Peter to share the work that he's done thus far on the goals we approved last fall. It's an opportunity for us to ask questions and to seek clarification, as we're now more than halfway through the year. At a future meeting, we will discuss some of the process around writing Peter's end-of-the-year evaluation, but this is an opportunity for him to present evidence of the work that has been completed to date.
All right, so just a couple notes for you. This is part of the superintendent evaluation process, and, since many of you were on the committee last year, but some were not, just to refresh your memory, this is not a presentation. At this point, the presentation comes at the end of the year. Also, at the end of the year, you actually receive some sample sources of evidence to support the different bullets. This is really just intended as a mid-year check-in when we give you a little bit of narrative around the work that we've done toward each of the goals. It really is just in the form of a memo. The purpose of the agenda item tonight is a discussion among you, an opportunity to provide me feedback, ask some questions at a mid-year point. And, if there's anything that we feel or you feel that we need to course correct on at this point in the year, it's a great opportunity to get that out so we have that feedback as a district administrative team. As we go through the spring, particularly into the early April, you will have a presentation on the overview of the superintendent evaluation process and the various responsibilities of committee members. And if you recall from last year, even if you're an outgoing committee member, you do participate in the evaluation process for the superintendent. So just a reminder of that. I think it was the April 2nd meeting, we have that presentation for you. And then at the following meeting after that, we end up presenting some evidence. And that gives you about a month then to complete written evaluations, and each committee member does a written evaluation, submits that to the chair, who compiles a composite evaluation based on all of the feedback received from the committee. That's then presented publicly at a meeting in May, and that completes the cycle. The conundrum in some of that is some of the goals we set do extend into May and sometimes even early June if we have a couple little items to wrap up, but we try and give you as much of the evidence toward what we have done as it's done, and then over the course of that month that you're writing, you might see another presentation or two that wraps up some of the information for you. But tonight is really your opportunity to ask some questions, offer me some feedback, and I'm just excited to hear kind of your thoughts and where you think we should be going as we round out kind of the last third of the year here.
Well, and to wipe the concern off your face, Kira, new members don't have to write evaluations when they first join. You have a whole year.
So I appreciated the update and the evidence from various goals, but it just as a more overarching issue, I was wondering how you see the various incidents that have taken place, in our schools around racial issues and, hate speech issues as providing any course correct or redirect or anything like that, or how you're thinking about those in terms of the goals or incorporating that.
Yeah, so I think that's great, and I think when we get together on March 16th for the school committee workshop, you're actually going to have a good chunk of time during that workshop to really take a deeper dive into the next district strategy. We have that, you've seen kind of the overarching four bubbles and know kind of generally where we're headed. We now have that as a leadership team to a point where we have some real text and narrative to that. And we're going to be bringing that to you for feedback before we then go back and do action planning for each of the different objectives and initiatives that we'll be undertaking. So I think you're going to see that start to evolve in that. Probably the heaviest weight of that strategic plan is around kind of our inclusive practice, school climate and culture. And I think you're going to see that come through loud and clear. We also have been able to incorporate a lot of the community trends and feedback that we've heard over the course of the year in helping us to develop that. You know, I think I think you saw this in my most recent letter to the community about continued incidents. The first thing we did was bring in our administrative team and the members who are most directly impacted, which typically is secondary schools, and then Dawn and I participated. And we really reached out to ADL. And the most stunning thing we heard was when we asked ADL, you know, do you have any other districts who are really struggling with this right now? And he said, you can pick any zip code. And we're seeing similar patterns, and we're getting a call from every community. One thing we've tried to stress with our administrators is I think there's a wide recognition that it's happening everywhere, but we're going to be judged by how we choose to respond to this and what we do with that. So it's really a long-term game for us, but I think the other piece that we've tried to impress on is it's one thing to play the long-term game, but we really see that we need to do some immediate interventions with our students. And so that's why we're planning, you know, within the next month, we'll be doing educational opportunities at the junior high and high school. Our elementary principals are talking to all of their teachers right now to get a sense of what's happening in each classroom around anti-bias education. We're coming back and we'll be communicating out with the community about maybe more short-term interventions for that. And then the strategy will spell out the longer-term projects. Sure.
I'm looking at the literacy goal with a question, two actually. One is on the screening piece. I see that the Dial 4 is in place. My understanding is that's a broader reaching assessment that's not real, that it does include some language learning issues, some foundational skills for literacy questions, but doesn't target the key predictors, all of them. And we've added the rapid automatized naming piece, but that's still not targeting all the key predictors. I'm wondering how happy you are with the RAN, and I see that we're beta testing a tool by Nadine Gabb that's a computer game, 20 minutes, something like this. But it's beta tested, so what's happening after that's done? Does that stay in the district? Does that leave the district? I'm wondering if that piece, if you're thinking about strengthening the assessment piece. So that's my first question. I'll just let you answer.
Talking with each other, who wants to talk first?
I'll speak to the dial. The dial is a piece of our kindergarten assessment and meets the requirements for special education screening in general. It has gross motor and fine motor. It has some other pieces to it. There's also a very lengthy parent questionnaire that does get at some very specific questions around family history for dyslexia. And then the other pieces we pick up through kindergarten screening, which Deb will talk about a little bit more with Nadine's piece and our ongoing work with the RAN.
I think there are two different screenings that got combined there together. So the dial is done for the special education screening, usually in the spring. In the fall, we have a literacy screening, and that's been a combination that's been based on some of the phonemic awareness pieces that need to be in place, as well as we just added that RAN piece this year. So what the new, the beta version through the lab, that will take the place of the literacy screening, and that takes place in kindergarten in the fall. What we're hoping to be able to do is to compare, you know, what was done in the fall and then with this new screening tool to just get a sense of the kind of information that we're able to gather. We're actually really excited to be able to be part of this pilot, and then just go from there to see where we would go next year. What we're very excited about, though, is it has all the components that are required with the new legislation in the pilot.
Okay. The other thing's more of a cultural understanding of how to teach reading. This district has been very passionate about balanced literacy and that approach, which is really prioritizes a love of literature, a lifelong love of literature and comprehension, but really at the expense and not everybody would agree with this statement, but at the expense of building strong foundational skills. So I'm wondering just, I know there's been a lot of professional development, very impressive list of professional development that the staff has engaged in here. I'm wondering if someone can speak to what is happening culturally in terms of buy-in and our ability just from the teacher's ability, just from a time perspective and a commitment perspective of doing both.
So I think, as you know, we have a committee of about 17 educators from every role and responsibility in the district: special education, speech and language pathologists, psychologists, classroom teachers, reading specialists, and building leaders, and English language, thank you, as well, leader. So that we can all be thinking about our roles and responsibilities around teaching reading. And through that work and unpacking what evidence-based resources, screening tools, professional learning is out there, we are building an MTSS framework that can then be applied to all of our other disciplines. But we're starting with reading because we know that we have some work to do. We will share that work with you, I think, later in the spring. And then we need to look to see and develop with our leadership team, because those are the folks who are going to be leading the work in each of the buildings, an implementation plan. Where do we need to start? Where do we need to put our time and effort? And to make sure that we're doing that with fidelity so that as we build out the next few years, that we're layering in all the skills that the teachers need in order to make sure that we are effectively teaching reading.
Just to add a little bit to that, I think, when you talk about culturally, what are the changes you want to see? Usually changes are rooted in beliefs. But, one of the things we always go into, change eyes wide open, that beliefs are about 7 times harder to change than behaviors. And, one of the things we have done, looking forward more to one of the later goals around educator evaluation, we're actually working significantly with our leadership team about how we can deepen the work we're doing with our educators, particularly with a focus on the impact teachers are having on students and being able to strengthen the conversations we have around that. And I think when our leaders are able to focus on strengthening their own practices in their conversations with teachers and the follow-up through the evaluation process, that's actually one way where you start to accelerate some of that change. A lot of the goals we set, we didn't want them to be independent of each other. We actually wanted them to be complementary. And so I think to talk to that cultural piece, that is one element of it, is making sure our leaders really feel strong in their ability to work with our teachers. But then I think also making sure that we have a consistency among our leadership team about how we're approaching educator evaluation, so that one school isn't looking at it differently than another school, and we have consistent practices for all our educators across the district.
So my question is also under the literacy section. So I'm looking at the professional training, and because I was reading also the news that about the DEI, which we have about 20% of multilingual, 16% of students with disability, and 27% and consider high needs. And I'm looking at the professional training under the section, and I kind of noticed there's a high focus on dyslexia this year. So, but there's a lot of other needs. So I was wondering that if we will be able to looking at other areas that which has a very high percentage of the needs for under the literacy.
Can you maybe just expand that a little bit? I want to make sure I'm answering the question I think I'm picking up.
Question is just because for the professional training that for the literacy, all for the disability, for the high needs, they need training, they need professional training. So my question is, because when I look at that, I don't see a lot of other areas, so that's my question.
Well, I think the reason for the focus in that area in particular is that really is our identified area of greatest need in our work. And I think, you know, what Diane alluded to in her question is some of our practices, we were missing some opportunities to really focus on some of the foundational skills involved in reading. And, you know, even though some of the professional development is tied to, you know, we're talking about it tied to the dyslexia legislation, it's actually proven throughout all of the literacy research that these are the fundamental practices that benefit all students. And so, you know, we've talked about it through the lens of dyslexia, but it's actually broader than that. It's really making sure that all of our teachers know what the fundamental elements of the science of reading are, so that as they approach literacy instruction in their classrooms, it's a well-informed approach to knowing how students learn. And I think a lot of the early work that we've done is really capacity building around making sure that our teachers know cognitively how students learn literacy and how they learn to read.
Okay. So I'll also expand, and part of the work that we're doing with that committee, again, that we have leaders from all of those different departments and roles, and that's important because as we're thinking about what the roles and responsibilities are going to be in this new framework, we also have a column alongside it that describes the kind of training and the professional learning that we want to go along with that to make sure that educators have that kind of training. And so we're thinking about like Wilson training for our special educators, trauma and culturally responsive training for students as well. And then the SEI training, which is around the EL and how to teach more effectively for students who are learning English. And so we are thinking alongside the roles and responsibilities, the kind of professional learning we want to make sure in the training for our educators.
I'd like to begin by affirming the idea that things need not match the school calendar with respect to the initiatives that we're working on. So if things happen to be 2/3 or 3/4 done at the end of the year because that's the cycle that it makes sense to work on them, you know, I'm very supportive of that practice. With respect to the question that I put to Dr. Whitbeck, I fully believe that, you know, some of the issues around social emotional learning are simply intractable without having a level of family involvement, you know, and I think Chris's answer was, you know, appropriate with respect to that, is that we have some challenges associated with that. Nonetheless, if that is essential to coming to a deep resolution over time, you know, I would encourage that, you know, as we move forward for some of these things to continue to look at ways to engage families. And then the last comment that I'll make by way of instant feedback is I would be extremely cautious with the use of the words all and never.
I want to build a little bit on what John said with regard to the completion of a goal or being bound to a specific calendar. And while I agree with John, where I struggle is that there's a specific time at which we need to review and evaluate. And so to make sure that, if there are areas that we may not get to a certain level of completion on, that we get enough information and sort of background to understand why and what we're moving forward with, so that when it comes time to write that evaluation, we don't feel like, oh, this was supposed to be done in this year and it's not going to. And as I continue to scroll through this over and over again, this is a pretty ambitious list of goals to achieve this year. And the one that's not on here is build a new school. So I think there's clearly a lot going on, and I don't want to necessarily give you a pass, but I think that it's important for us to say, if we don't make as much progress as we might have committed to early on in the year, that we just get a little bit of background so that when it comes time to evaluate where we've gotten, we have a full sort of context with which to evaluate that with.
I'm just, speaking of timelines, I guess looking at the timeline under the social emotional supports for students goal, and I know that you had a large study that was being conducted around that goal, and one of the things I'm curious about is some of the goals that would be happening kind of around this time of year are around aligning staff practices with best practices, and the thing I'm wondering about is if they're simultaneous to looking at what we are doing, is there also looking at what are those best practices that we're kind of hoping to align toward? Is there a sense of a specific, I guess, program or even aim that we're hoping to implement?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll let Dawn speak to it a little bit too, or maybe Dawn, do you want to start and then I'll jump in?
Yeah, so you'll hear actually from the district management group in early April, I believe. They'll be joining us here to present their findings, which I think you'll find fascinating, to borrow a word from Dr. Whitbeck. Not only do we need to look at what we're already doing, but really think about what might be, what do we want to measure? What do we want to measure? How do we want to measure it? At what grades do we want to measure it? And as we think next year about engaging perhaps in like the portrait of a graduate, where we engage the community in conversations around what do we want our graduates to know and be able to do, not only from an academic perspective, from habits of mind and all sorts of other areas. I think those two are going to go very much hand in hand as the community helps us to think about all of the different pieces for our students. So that work is very much going to be ongoing, but with regard to the best practices, yes, there's so many resources out there. I feel like every day somebody sends me another link about, oh, this, Harvard has one of the best ones. Looking at all of the different programs, what do they do, what don't they do, and whether or not they're evidence-based. And so all of those pieces are things that we're absolutely taking into consideration.
And just to add to that, my experience in terms of what all students are getting, there's no one program that actually meets all of the needs. And there was actually a great study by Harvard a few years ago where they looked at all of the curricular and non-curricular approaches to social emotional learning. And they actually evaluated based on a lot of the CASEL standards and instructional approaches. So I don't think from a curricular standpoint, there's any one curriculum that you're going to see us adopting. Instead, I think probably long-term, it's about picking the resources and approaches that we want teachers to be able to use within their classroom to respond to needs. I think one of the things we're talking about in terms of aligning service delivery is going to be a long-term project for us. And that really came out of the program evaluation, and it's actually a strategic goal that you will see in the plan. In fact, a lot of the outcomes of the social emotional program evaluation are almost word-for-word initiatives that we're undertaking in the long-range strategic plan. And what we did is we used the program eval to help develop the plan so that it really talked clearly and we had a good evidence base of why we were tackling different things. But I think what we heard in the program eval, not to spoil the punchline that you'll hear in a couple of weeks, but essentially, one of the big commendations for our district was our commitment to the number of staff that we have in place. And one of the goals that they set out for us, which I think, we all felt in our gut, is we need to do we need to do some improvement in aligning how the various types of staff we have work together and complement each other so that we don't end up replicating the same jobs among multiple people. And allowing our staff to be able to specialize and pick up different niche needs for us based on some of their own expertise is something that we're going to be working on, but that certainly is probably a multi-year project because you end up doing it gradually as opportunities arise. There's no one quick way to realign a lot of the way people are working.
Yes, I kind of have my eye to this idea of some continuity from across the grade levels. So I know that we wouldn't have one program that everybody uses, but one of the things I remember you talking about early on when you were talking about the goals of social emotional learning is that when kids enter the middle school and then the high school, do they have common foundation that allows them to kind of come together at a time when emotional health needs really become escalated, I would think, as kids are going through everything that they go through in middle school and high school. And so if that foundation is more consistent in elementary school, it might be helpful. So that's kind of where my question was coming from.
No, thank you for that clarification. Yeah, absolutely. I think, we want to take a little bit broader view and I'm going to keep saying this over and over. When we get together at the workshop on the 16th, you'll be able to see the strategic plan and how it plays out. One of the first activities we want to do with our community is develop a unified vision for kind of the knowledge, skills, habits of mind that we want our students to be graduating from our high school with, and be able to use that to actually do some backwards planning. You know, how you approach that in any individual elementary school may change, but yet we should all be building towards some consistent outcomes. And that, there's a great program called Portrait of a Graduate that we've been, you know, doing a lot of research around and getting ready to bring in. Incidentally, that work will actually complement the high school's accreditation process when it comes up, because that's now an expectation of the accreditation process. But rather than just having a high school do a Portrait of a Graduate, which, you know, I mean, kids aren't born in 9th grade, you know, but really starting that in kindergarten and pre-K and building that work out. You know, when we talk about knowledge, skills, habits of mind, as Dawn, I think, alluded to, or Deb, I can't remember who said it, but it's really broader than just kids being good mathematicians or good readers or good, you know, critical thinkers is a pretty common one, but how can we think broader about the types of skills that we want students to build? What does it mean to be emotionally healthy? What does it mean, you know, we might say as a community we want our students to be environmental stewards coming out of high school. We might say that we want students to be culturally competent individuals. And so by starting with the outcomes and developing that with a sense of community toward that lens, we can then actually think about how that begins in pre-K and builds through high school. So that's really going to be next year's work when we get there. But again, March 16th, time and place, it'll be exciting.
I wanted to follow up with what Adam and John were saying. We knew this from the beginning. These are a lot of really big goals for the year. What I appreciate is that while they have been very big goals, you have managed to be responsive to what's actually happening throughout the school year. So you haven't focused so much on, no, this is ABC, this is how, you know, this is what I said at the beginning, this is what I'm going to get done, but instead really listen to things that came up during the school year and are being responsive to what our community needs at this point in time. So I guess I would say I feel more comfortable with going into evaluations with some things not having been completed, with the understanding that what you have had to shift your focus on have been things that are immediate needs. And I think that's valuable. That's important.
So I'd just like to piggyback on that, because I noticed that, you know, one of the goals is the stakeholder engagement, and I was very encouraged to see, you know, that you had, you know, the DEI Family Advisory Group. I'm very encouraged to see, you know, 70 applicants and 40 families being selected. Just going through that, you know, the goal and what's been happening with it, I realize there's a lot of work in there. But I would encourage you to keep your shoulder to that work, because it's fundamental to a lot of what we've been talking about. So.
Hi, my question is more around the work around educator growth and development, and how you plan to, it's possible that I just missed it, but how you tap into student perception of teacher growth and development, because I see how the leadership team gets to have training, and evaluators will, I think, gain more tools, have more consistency, and approach evaluation in a deeper, more meaningful way, perhaps. And I also imagine that the numbers that you cite here are preliminary, and you expect that the teacher reporting will only improve. But I wonder if in evaluation measurements that you might undertake, whether you consider whether it's possible to have student perspectives with that. And certainly I think that's harder to do in lower grades, but I think that evaluators can sort of glean student engagement in a different way when the kids are younger versus gleaning student engagement when kids are older. And I just was curious about some of the differences and student feedback.
Yeah, so, I think in terms of a formalized approach to using direct student feedback, like surveys or something like that of educators, that would actually have to be a committee discussion because it would require negotiation with the association around teacher evaluation. So there's typically a process, but most of our teachers actually are surveying their kids on a regular basis and using that themselves in their own growth, and often that is a conversation that they'll have. It's not formally used. I could say, through the evaluation process, one of the things in terms of our focus on students, as we've gone through, one of the often first steps that evaluators do when they go into a classroom, they're not necessarily looking at what the teachers are doing. They're actually going over and talking to students and saying, what are you doing? What are you supposed to learn today? How do you know if you've learned it? And asking those questions of students. And it's actually the students' responses that provide the feedback we give to teachers. So there's some nuances in that. I think Marie also wanted to add before.
Thank you. Within our process, we do have student feedback. So the teachers gather student feedback. At upper grades, it might be a survey, it might be a Google form with specific questions. At lower grades, it might be a writing that the student's asked to do to the teacher to give them feedback with some prompts. It might be a discussion in the really lower grades. And then the teacher gathers the feedback and then writes a reflection on the student feedback that is shared with the evaluator, and then they talk about it, and that's incorporated into the overall report that comes back to the teacher. So we don't have it really formalized data gathering kind of thing, but we have it, that's how we have it set up. Yep.
So kind of follow up on the stakeholder engagement, kind of follow up on John that I went back and Peter mentioned that one thing that make everything goes well is the relationship. The relationship is when we have a really strong relationship that the stakeholder engagement will be much stronger. So when I was looking at this, and one biggest relationship to me is the teacher and the students. And so I was wondering, because I was looking at it, there's a lot of effort on building a lot of like leadership and the staff, and I was wondering if there's any opportunities that we will be able to enhance the teacher and the student relationship. And of course, and the teacher, the other really important relationship is the teacher and the families. So that's because those are the three triangles.
That's a great point. And I think if you go back to the challenge success data from the last time we presented, that was actually some of the survey data we collected. And one of the things we're most proud of is the relationships our students report with the adults in the building are actually higher than that of all of our peer group. So we're starting from a good place in terms of that. But one thing you will also see from a long-term strategy that's actually an item in the strategic plan that you're going to see on March 16th. Is a focus on school culture through a focus on relationships. I'll be honest, the fact that a lot of the questions that you have, I'm continuing to say, actually that's something you're going to see on March 16th in the strategic plan is probably a good thing in terms of your alignment about the direction that you're thinking we need to be looking and what you're going to see us choosing to focus on.
Just to follow up to what Maya said, I'm thinking about carpool conversations, and maybe the disc, because I ran the carpool today, so it's an opportunity to listen to kids beyond your own that may be in different classes or whatever. And just in terms, I understand exactly what you said about how student feedback formally incorporated into a teacher evaluation would be something that has to go through the union and everything else. But I just wonder, sort of through the lens of what Dana and Lee have done with their school improvement plan in terms of thinking about how each goal we have with a lens towards students and a lens towards families and a lens towards educators, if rather than asking students directly, what do you think of this teacher, but maybe inquiring of students what kind of things they think about when they're like their criteria for an educator evaluation might be very different from what an adult's criteria for educator evaluation is. And so rather than having them report directly on particular teachers or whatever else, I just wonder if maybe that would be a way to get at what seems like sometimes a disconnect between how students feel about educators in general, or even an entire subject, and how our leadership team then views those teachers.
No, that's a great point. And one of the things you're going to see in our strategic plan is that Don and I actually have been reaching out to a couple different providers, and we're looking at how we could actually implement district-wide surveys of all of our students at all levels that actually can give us data around social emotional learning and students' growth in key indicators there, but also get a sense of their perceptions of school culture and climate, the relationships that they have, and some of the platforms we've actually been looking at also include family feedback as well, and opportunities to gather that sense of information. So we can actually look at a district, and individual schools can look at what that looks like on a school level and use that to actually inform the goals. That also plays into something else, and I referenced it in the body of this document somewhere. I don't remember exactly where, but Don and I have been in conversations with the Mid-Atlantic Equity Consortium, and we've sent them a copy of this draft strategy, because what we'd like to do is come up with some key data indicators for each of the 4 overarching objectives that we want to undertake that can help us measure how the work we're going to do will actually impact our students. And so if we want to improve the relationships in our building and continue to strengthen those, then what's a key data point that we might be able to get baseline data on, and then actually set benchmarks for how we can improve that over time. That's something that we actually really want to make sure is a key part of this strategy, is thinking in terms of, what's the impact that we're actually having and how can we start to quantify that. And also, I think by picking some key data indicators for each, overarching objective, and I'm thinking 2 to 3 max, to really think about how we want to set goals around this, we can actually start to focus in on the type of data we want to measure ourselves by, and not necessarily try and chase every piece of data that comes out, because we already generate more data than we will ever use in our lifetimes. And so the key is figuring out what is the right data to measure, and making sure that the data is fully encompassing the entire way that we want to grow our schools, not just some of the traditional data that we've always had, like SATs and PSATs and MCAS scores. That's always going to be important. But we need to think a little bit broader than that as well, and think of the other ways we want to measure our progress.
Just to piggyback on that, is that kind of, it sounds like you're speaking from that report from the Rennie group, or that you sent out about a month or 6 weeks or so ago? Is that, is that where you're at with that?
It's similar.
Okay.
Yep. It's similar. I shared with some people in some casual conversations, I think even in, an earlier small group meeting that we might have done with a couple school committee members. Cambridge Public Schools has identified some key indicators, and they actually track them on their website. And one of the nice things that they've done is they actually not only set targets for kind of the aggregate, so, they look at like student-staff relationships as a key indicator for them. Not only do they look at improving the overall progress, but they actually have looked at the benchmark, the starting point for every subgroup, and they want to see, the overall impact of their work, but then they also measure their progress based on the different subgroups and some of their underrepresented groups in their district. And I think that would be a powerful way for us to look at it. So it's one thing to kind of impact the aggregate, but I think we have to dig deeper than just aggregating our data all the time and start to take a look at the more nuanced ways. I do see John laughing, so I'm sure a comment's.
So follow up on what you just said, and as we measure the process, are we building, so my fear is that we're kind of waiting a whole year, then we find out what's going on, and there's something going, we need to change. So is there any way that we will be able to build a structure that we will be able to collect the feedback along the way, then we will be able to fine-tune the process?
No, that's a great question. So on March 16th, when we get together, what you're actually going to see, we're going to really talk deeply about the strategy that we have, the overarching objectives, and the various initiatives that will go into those objectives. But in addition, I'm going to share with you, for some feedback, a draft action planning template where not only are we measuring the long-term impact of the initiatives, but we're actually setting out for each initiative what will be the short-term impact measures, as well as what are the process benchmarks we intend to see along the way. Because it's important for us when we do this that we think about, process is one thing, but then you have to have short-term impact and long-term impact measures as well. So yeah, we're thinking deeply about that, and we've been developing the template. We won't have the finished version of it for you, but we want to share our thinking with you for some feedback then, so that as we then finish that as administrators, we've incorporated your feedback on March 16th, if I didn't say that.
So I hope Peter remembers that that's not actually the only agenda item for the March 16th workshop.
It is not.
Okay. We all set? Did everyone get to ask their questions? Okay. Thank you, Peter. That was thorough. I hope that that discussion informed your next steps. All right, item 4.3 is the recommendation to review and approve the Bond Council Financial Advisor Report of Results for the bond for the building project.
Before Dave starts, I'm not going to at all take away, his joy of being able to present some of these numbers to you. But I just want to make sure I thank Margaret Dennehy, our treasurer, and Dave Vertolino and his entire finance team, as well as the debt strategy subcommittee, and all of the people who worked behind the scenes on this, especially Margaret Dennehy. This was an extraordinary amount of work to get all of the documentation we needed to do to get ready to issue these bonds. It was absolutely a great undertaking, and the result was
breathtaking. I thought it was a fill in the blank. Thank you. Yeah, so what you have is about a 6-item package. I missed the cue, right? I'll get there. The first thing that you have is on this color paper. And that's the press release that was sent to us from the financial advisor. And Margaret, Peter gave her credit. I'm going to quantify the fruits of her efforts. We got bids for what will be $76,175,000 worth of bonds for an average interest rate of 2.15%, which is I think it's not a stretch to say ridiculously low. And I'll quantify that a little bit later in the few minutes that I have. There were 8 bids. This was not a one-off. The bids were between 2.15 and 2.55% net interest rate. This $76 million covers both the Douglas Gates School and the CIP plan. I'm going to get into a summary of the numbers. In the press release, it talks about the district's AAA rating conferred by Standard & Poor's, the highest rating attainable. We're really proud about that. And also want to give credit to the district's financial advisors, Hilltop Securities. They did an outstanding job of preparing the district, Margaret and me individually, when we took the ratings call with Standard & Poor's, and just walking us through the process. The process isn't over, as you'll see in the materials that I'm going to present. It was the culmination of years of strategic planning, needs assessments, public presentations, and the great good fortune of timing for both of these major financial undertakings to take place at the same time. The next thing in the materials, and I should say these materials are obviously hot off the press. The sale took place on Tuesday, so none of this was available to go out to you last week. You have something that's issued by S&P Global Ratings, and it's the official ratings report for the credit worthiness of Acton-Boxborough School District. As Peter said, it's good reading. It's actually not very technical. It's pretty readable, and you'll see a lot of things about your school district and your communities that you'll say, that's pretty good, or yeah, no, that is true. It's good stuff. The financial advisor said they could quantify the value of a AAA rating for us. So based on recent sales of similar size bonds by non-AAA issues, they sent me this email yesterday. The approximate difference in total interest costs over the life of the bonds for a bond issue of AB's size, structure, and credit quality, AAA, and an issue of similar size and structure with a AA rating is, over the life of the bonds, $2.5 million. So when we have, since I've been here, some of the things we focused on with E&D is credit rating, and it's a nebulous concept. The FA was able to, for us, put a dollar sign on that nebulous concept. And my response, of course, was to Peter of Hilltop, who sent the email to me, noting that Margaret was on the distribution of that message. I said, I think Margaret's going to be asking for a raise, but and he chimed back, yes, and well deserved. So Margaret was intending to be here tonight. I wanted to have a face to put with the effort behind it, but we decided it was not appropriate to have her out this late just to say, hi, everybody, and so the default presentation is mine. And so the next thing you have is this presentation, which I'll go through briefly. Summary of the bond sale. So there's something called true interest cost, which is just plain English. What's the lowest interest cost given all the nuances of time value of money? And for the Douglas Gates School, we're going to get $75 million. That's how much money is going to go into our bank, and we will be repaying over 30 years at a rate of just under 2.2%, just under $70 million. I'm going to try and re-explain premium in a second, but that's the major numbers from the twin school borrowing. For the CIP plan funding, we're going to get $7.5 million. We're going to pay that over 10 years at an average rate of about 1.02%, and we're going to be paying back $6.2 million in premium. So the aggregate bid, as I said, was 2.15, and the aggregate amount of debt that will go on our books to be repaid is $76,175,000. So let me just set this up quickly. I know it can be hard to get your head around rates, differences in rates, bond premiums, so I came up with a quick vignette to try and, again, explain this. So, yes, it starts off, a guy walks into an investment advisor's office. I want to buy $75 million worth of risk-free government bonds. They're safe. The interest income will be tax-free. That makes them attractive to me. So the bond underwriter says, well, we've got an issue right now. It's a AAA-rated school district. They need to fund construction of a new school building, and it'll house over 1,000 kids. Now, the guy who's buying the bonds doesn't care about the 1,000 kids, but I had room on the line, so I put it there. The bond buyer says, sounds interesting. What would the cash flow look like for that? So the underwriter says the bonds would have a coupon rate, and the bond buyer knows what that means, of 5%. So you'd lock in a tax-free return for 30 years. 5%'s a lot higher, though, than the going interest rate for this investment. So you would be repaid $70 million plus interest. That makes your true interest earnings 2.15%. And of course, how could he resist? He's in. So the asterisk numbers, 75 million is what the investor is going to put down. 70 million is what the investor is going to be repaid. That difference is bond premium. That's how much extra the buyer has to put up to be able to lock in a return of 5%. Why is it 5%? That has to do with the underwriter having to sell the bonds to a secondary market and make them attractive. But people with that kind of money who want that kind of return, risk-free, long-term, tax-free, that's how they sell those types of investments. So hopefully that it makes it a little bit clearer what this nebulous thing about bond principle means. This is what it means to the district as far as the next 5 years, and then the numbers pretty much don't vary for the entire 30-year term. We had said at the February 6th meeting, we estimated the first-year debt service to be $3,625,000. It's going to be in year one and the life of the bond, $3,445,000, between $445,000 and $449,000 annually. The consensus of the Debt Strategy Subcommittee, administration, everybody has been pay these off on a level basis versus level premium where the first year costs are significantly higher. The rates were low when we decided to bond up front. This is how much lower. So you see the number at the bottom of this slide, 5.4 million. This is how much lower the phrase historic has impacted us. So this is how much lower it is over the life of the bonds from the estimate that we made on February 6th. It's really remarkable. So what does this mean to the average taxpayer? This is an update of a chart we've been trotting out for a while now. The light blue is where we were on February 6th. We estimated $405 per average taxpayer in Acton, $296 per average taxpayer in Boxborough. The Boxborough number was confirmed by the town accountant there. It's down to $279 annually. The Acton number was confirmed late by one of the officials in Acton, and it's down by about a cup of coffee, so it's down to $383. It's still a substantial amount of money. We joke about the lowness, if you will, of the rates of interest, but there's still a $75 million worth of cost, the district's share of the cost of this project that has to be repaid. So even if it was historically less than what you see now, it was never going to be free. It was always going to be a significant amount of money. But what I think is noteworthy is the dark blue, which is what we're looking at as the final answer, is about half of the number that was estimated when both towns in December of 2017 projected what this might cost the average taxpayer. Same average taxpayer, the number now is about half of what it was then, and at that time, the need was presented so sufficiently that the towns overwhelmingly bought into the project and have stuck with it since then. This is just the details of what I've been talking about so far. This will form the basis of another Table 6 calculation, which we'll do. I don't have that here. The number that you need to key on here is the difference between what we presented on February 6th and the actual bond sale, and the difference is just over $179,000 reduction to the budget, and since this is all assessable costs to the assessment, and we have the breakdown accordingly between Acton and Foxborough. So I had the pleasure of coming into the office on Monday morning and having an email, which you might be able to read on the bottom there, from Adam, but given results of the weekend and the financial markets panic from the end of last week through the weekend. There's a sale at the bond store this week. Good luck tomorrow. Well, we had good luck. But there's even more still, because what I've talked about so far relates to the twin school debt. There's equally good news about the CIP debt. So for the original plan, the plan that was used to present this whole concept of a CIP plan, and hey, you know, we can accelerate the completion of some of the projects if we bond a certain amount of money up front, but we probably will need to do that, borrow on a short-term basis for a couple of years, and then issue bonds. Well, that plan that was bought into by the school committee and by the communities was going to call for repayment of about $9.4 million through 2031. When we revised it, and because interest rates looked so favorable, and we said, let's not worry about short-term borrowing, let's do the bonds. Look, if the new school project passes, we can coordinate the timing of the bonds at the same time in February or March. We revised the estimates, and it was a savings of about $1 million, and that was the interest rate came down, the lack of short-term interest helped, and there was a significant savings. But since that time, so since February 6th for the CIP bonds, there's a further savings, and that's wrong. It's not a further savings of $1 million. It's a further savings of $407,000. Dave did a copy and paste and didn't edit the resulting amount. But you can see that the total now for the bonds, for $7.5 million worth of bonds, we're going to repay $7.9 million over 10 years' time. Not interest-free, but pretty darn close to interest-free for a 10-year period of time, compared to the plan that originally got the CIP in motion. It's almost $1.5 million savings, which is just remarkable. And so there is a little bit more work to do. I'll leave the slide up there. But what needs to happen is the school committee, I'm going to respectfully suggest you consider two sets of votes tonight. One would be to revisit the budget, which as it stands now, you voted at $97,599,777, and take into consideration the difference in the first-year debt service from the bond sale, and as a result, the revised assessments for Acton and Boxborough. So that's one vote. That's our internal numbers. The second vote, which we will get to afterwards, will be the official formal vote that Bond Counsel sent to me, and that is in your packet as well. I'll direct you to the fourth thing in the packet, which is the memo that you received last week that was outlined and had blanks in it as placeholders. I've entered in the numbers, and the third page of that is the revised motion that you could consider, to take into consideration the reduced first-year debt service. And Tessa, do you want to do, I know the agenda has them in the other order. I put the formal votes for the bonds last. Does it make a difference to you?
It doesn't matter. Adam was pointing out to me the helpful email on the back that says that that for the very long, lengthy, multi-page motion.
And your blood pressure went down significantly, just
well,
like
Adam's
the interest rates.
Adam's been
right?
practicing since budget.
And practice for nothing.
So if it's your pleasure, what I would suggest is, number one, if you have any questions about what I presented, please do so. The motion that's on the third page of the final memo dated today from me, I think that one needs to be read in its entirety.
Okay. You have a question, Michael? Yeah. All right.
So I think that we locked the interest rate, right? We are already locked, right?
So I did ask the financial advisor, what is the repercussions if rates go up significantly the day after somebody proposes a bid, and he assured me that there is no way that they are legally committed to it. What you'll be doing tonight in the second vote is formally, legally agreeing to the terms of the bond and doing all that's necessary to make them a legal instrument.
So that means that even the interest rate, continue to drop. So we're not going to follow, because I heard that the interest rate could be dropped to 0. So like the Federal is considering that it's possible. So I'm not sure if that was in the consideration when we decided to unlock this rate and then vote tonight.
This isn't a negotiated rate of interest. This is something that's publicly auctioned, and there were 8 bidders, and this is the lowest effective interest rate of all the bids. And what you're proposing is, might interest rates go lower still? They could, and they could go higher, and they've been higher for decades before Tuesday's sale. And when we had the call with the financial advisor, they were telling me that the people in their shop were talking about lowest bond sale they've ever experienced in their careers. Somebody said, and well, I won't get into the anecdotal elements of it, but this is, if you try to time it for another 0.1%, the risk is far greater that it's going to go the other way, and presumably soon. Given, I'm not a financial analyst myself, but this is about as low as it can go. And when you consider how long it's taken to get to the point where this project has been approved and is ready to go, and the bonds were issued, you could not have timed it better if you had the opportunity.
All right, so in the little packet of information that Dave gave you are the actual wording of the motion, if you want to follow along as Adam reads.
Thanks. So this is in the back of Dave's memo. And I move that the total appropriation for the Acton-Boxborough Regional School District for the fiscal year of July 1st, 2020 through June 30th, 2021 be set at $97,420,768, and that member towns be assessed in accordance with the Education Reform Law, and the terms of the regional agreement and amendments thereto as follows. Acton, $66,012,542, consisting of a capital assessment of $5,620,491 and an operating assessment of $60,392,051, and Boxborough, $12,202,690, consisting of a capital assessment of $933,618 and an operating assessment of $11,269,072, with the remainder to be accounted for by the following sources of funds. Anticipated Chapter 78 in the amount of $15,345,811. Anticipated Chapter 71, Section 16C Transportation Aid of $2,097,225. Anticipated Charter School Aid in the amount of $50,000. Anticipated Federal Medicaid reimbursement of $250,000. Anticipated investment earnings of $300,000. Estimated miscellaneous revenues of $17,500. And transfer from E&D reserves in the amount of $1,145,000.
Is there any further discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Any abstentions? Any opposed? Great, that passes unanimously.
Thank you. So then there's two items left in the materials you got tonight. One is a 2-page letter. I think it's front and back on one piece of paper for you. These are the instructions from bond counsel. They'd like to close the transaction on March 12th, and so we've compressed everything into this meeting. Margaret has signed off on, has signed and accepted the award, subject to school committee approval. She's going to deliver all this material to bond counsel tomorrow if you approve. So the Lock Lord memo describes what has to happen. The last one, which is 4 pages and has some yellow and blue shading on it. It's color-coded because, just so you're clear about this piece of paper is a certification that Beth, the school committee secretary, will be making. And so the first paragraph, which I've highlighted in blue, and the last paragraph, which is on page 3, is also in blue. That's Beth's certification about the votes that the school committee takes, which is everything in between shaded yellow. Now, the last item I gave to you is an email from bond counsel, which basically says, if you'd like, you can read those 2 pages and all of those numbers and years, et cetera. But if you choose to do so, you need only read the motion that I've typed for you, where it says on page 3, school committee vote. And I know you took lozenges all day, and it's going to be. And so,
with much gratitude to Ms. Adams, I would move to adopt the votes related to the sale and issuance of the $76,175,000 bonds to be issued on March 12th, 2020, as presented and written above, said votes to be incorporated into the minutes of this meeting by reference.
All those in favor? Do you have a question? Sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. John, is there discussion?
Yeah, I think, obviously, this has been a long meeting, but this was super important, and I sent a note to Dave after the sale that it's better to be lucky. But of course, it's best to be lucky and smart, and there's so much in this that reflects, how smart Dave was and Margaret. The willingness to change plans as things went along. I mean, it looks very easy when Dave shows that whole series of we started up a little here, we got it down a little bit, we got it down a little bit. This is really very high art, and so I didn't want us to move to this vote without, recognizing both the lucky and the smart, both for you and for Margaret.
Thank you, John. Adam.
I would just add that this is a significant savings to the taxpayers without any reduction in the vision and capabilities of both our capital improvement plan and the building that we're putting together. So I think that's also another really important thing to note.
Just quick question that, we're going to sell the bond on the March 12th, right, close the transaction. So when are we going to start our project to start using this process?
Start the school construction project? Well, it has started.
Yeah, actually, so when are we going to start, consuming this process that we got from the bond sale? Because the bond sale will be happening, I assume that bond sale will be happening on the March 12th, right? So we're going to close the transaction there. So, and then we will get the money immediately. So when are we going to start consuming those, the proceeds that the money we received?
So I'm not sure, the question is either when are we going to start spending the money, or when are we, is that the question? Well, we've already spent a good portion of the CIP project money, and we'll be able to reimburse ourselves to the extent that we've paid out of our own existing capital, and that's in some of the documents that we've had to provide to bond counsel. As far as the school project itself, there's an early construction contract that was signed that's minimal dollars, and it begins in earnest, I think, about 14 seconds after school's out this school year.
That's accurate. Unless there's a slow child and then it begins before.
All right. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Great, that passes unanimously. Thank you. All right, item 4.5 is a Director of Special Education Search update. Marie?
Positive process, but with a very limited pool of candidates.
So what are the next steps?
So next steps, we have a couple of options to pursue, or couple ways we could go. One option is to decide to post the position again, and see if we can get a pool of applicants together and conduct another round of interviews. That would probably, I will say, we actually extended the posting already 2 different times prior to conducting the interviews, because we just saw internally that the candidate pool was not where it needed to be. So we could try one more time and see what we get for candidates. The other option, in all honesty, is going with an interim director. And then, that bifurcates the choices again to either post for another interim director and, open up the process and start a full search for an interim director, or to try and, see if we can pursue having the current interim director stay on. I would suggest that if we choose to go with an interim director, that we do not search for a new interim director, because that would guarantee us 4 special education directors in 4 years. Because you would have had, Pam Smith from last year, then you'd have Debbie Dixon this year. If you brought someone new in, you'd have a 3rd person, but then you'd be guaranteeing that you'd be going out again for a 4th person the following year. And I think any traction that our special educators have been able to gain in the last year or so to kind of recalibrate to a direction will be for naught, and will be just starting really from ground zero every year. So my goal tonight is to hear a little bit of feedback from you about your preference before we try and finalize a decision about how to proceed. But I think the choice is either try and go out again, or try and pursue, the possibility of Debbie staying on. And it's important to me to hear some of that feedback.
I would be interested in seeing if Debbie would want to stay, because just some level of stability would be very helpful.
I have the same opinion about that. And then the question with regard to reposting and the required certifications, is this a position where there is an option to conduct a nationwide search because we don't need any Massachusetts special certifications, or is that problematic?
It's possible. There are people in other states who are licensed for this type of a thing. I know, that does happen. Special education regulations do vary state by state, and Massachusetts special education laws are specific to Massachusetts. So there's certainly an adjustment period. There are federal laws that govern all of it, but then Massachusetts has different laws. That is certainly a possibility to do a nationwide search. Nationally, this is not a position that is easy to fill. And I don't know as though we would see a vastly different pool on a nationwide search, because in nationwide searches, you're uprooting a family to do that. And that, you usually, unless you find someone with a very specific reason to want to go to a zip code, the salary scale that you're looking at probably for a relocation is not what a special education director makes. That's my gut.
Can I hate to tell you, but we did. We advertised in the local sort of school website ways to advertise, and we advertised in a national special education organization. Of the 13 applicants, 2 or 3 of them were from out of state. One was from Indiana, one was from Texas, I think. So, we could certainly go back and do that again, but we are getting late in the year. We started advertising January 17th.
I'll just add, actually, I'd like to hear feedback. Well, one other piece to that is an alternative to doing that is to think of an interim combined with looking at some strategies over the course of the year to really grow some internal capacity in that area and try and prepare some people for other leadership roles, because it's just, there's not going to be a drastic change. I mean, we can continue to go out, and we would go out the following year, but I think what we also need to do is focus on some capacity building too. I think I don't have an answer to what that looks like, but certainly that's something we can explore strategies for, so.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense to me to go out and try to do this again right now. It seems like you your best foot forward. You've done everything that we could, you could possibly do, and this is just where we are. And I think it's a great idea to really kind of look at what we already have internally and see kind of building that up a bit, and then to see if Debbie can stay.
So first of all, I want to thank the committee that worked with you as well. I think it sounds like, I don't think it sounds like, it does sound like there was some good work done already that can be used, again, to better define this position. And as you go out to find new applicants, there's some work that's already sort of in the bank for that. I would agree that it does, the best bet or the best option for us now is to stick with our current interim director. And then, my last question is, and I think, Peter, you sort of alluded to it as well, just going back out next January and not revamping, relooking at what's going on, that's Einstein's definition of insanity, right? Doing the same thing over and over again and hoping for different results. So my question is, what would we do, or what could we do to make this position more attractive? Is it, it's clearly not just salary. Is it the definition of the position? Is it how it sits in our administrative management structure? Are there possibilities to promote from within to fill this need and support that person with guidance and professional development? I guess that's sort of my question, is how, and as we look forward.
Adam, I appreciate that a lot, and I actually have some initial ideas on that, but I think what I would want to do before we necessarily have that conversation at this level, I actually would love to partner with CPAC a little bit and, some of our staff, and be able to talk to them about what they see as needs and opportunities, and do think about, like, what is the long-term, how can we get this to be a successful position long-term? Because, it's just a tough pull, and we have to think a little bit differently.
So I have a question about this, is like, or I have thought about this, is that, regarding the qualification, right? So, were we set up the qualification, very high at the very high level, so that that nobody can fit into that, or it's just it's a minimum qualification, like because we have state law, we have federal law to cover that. So are we set up our qualification much higher than that minimum that the law requires?
No, not at all. They have to have a license as a special education administrator in Massachusetts. That's a standard requirement that you would need. It's required by the Department of Education. So we required that, and a master's degree, and experience with special education. And we were hoping for district-wide experience with special education leadership, but at least some special education leadership chairperson kind of thing, which we did get a couple people that had that, but yep, so no, I would not say that we set the qualifications higher than we needed to or had to.
It's quick. After Adam's question, I thought Peter's response was going to be, we're just going to add it to the March 16th workshop. But so my question is, I mean, we're assuming Deb has an interest level, and it's, it's a two-way street. So, we just have to keep aware of that.
We're almost done. I was just going to speak, though, to what John asked, and I think a little bit of what Michael was getting to, but I don't have a ton of experience in looking at search committees, but our superintendent search was a national thing, and I just know from looking at resumes of people that live in different states, education in each one of our states is profoundly different in the way that it's handled, in terms of the way school districts are sized and what the different responsibilities of different educators are and everything. That this is something that we would be much more likely to find someone that fit our criteria by looking at mostly Massachusetts applicants, I would think, just because I had no idea how profoundly different. I mean, you hear about it in the news and stuff all the time, right? But looking at the structures of school districts, and some school districts are well, anyway, massive numbers of people because they're run by county size and things like that. So it just really varies in terms of that. Thank you, Marie. Thank you. Okay. Did you want to, no, I didn't think so. I was going with my gut on that one. All right.
Thank you, everyone, for that feedback.
Item 4.6 is our potential meeting dates. We don't have to talk about this at length right now. The initial draft of our meetings for next year is based on this year's schedule. The one thing I did want to get some feedback on is that Peter and I had an initial conversation about having our annual summer workshop be something like what we did last year for our seed training, an overnight retreat at the Wiley Center in Beverly. Because the feedback that I got, that I heard and I gave after having that workshop was how great it was to be able to get away from the actual work that we do in this room and get to know each other a little bit better and do work that touched each of us, I think, personally. We wouldn't be doing a seed training again, but maybe some work that built upon the same kind of, so it's so late, 10 of 10. Something that built upon those same kind of conversations and things like that. Yes, Amy?
Yes, I agree.
Okay. So the center is available the last week of June if members are interested in that kind of idea. Can I just get sort of a consensus so that we can decide if we want to send? Yes? Yes? End of June. You're not right. Okay. So the one other thing was that the MASC, given the timing of the MASC conference in November, we were looking at possibly having like a third meeting in October, the 29th, instead of the same week of the conference. Usually we've done it in the past. We've had the meeting on Tuesday and then the conference starts on Wednesday. Is that something that people are interested in? Doesn't matter? Okay, great. And our August business meeting date will be set after the next round of elections happens, and everyone has a chance to look at their calendars. Okay. Item 4.7 is a recommendation to approve $1,466.35 donation from the AB Friends of Music for the ABRHS Performing Arts.
I'm going to just make a comment.
Okay, 2020 New York City trip. Go ahead.
So just one comment on this. We are looking very carefully at travel as we get updates from coronavirus. We are in the process of communicating with some of our families internally. International trips, as you likely are aware, the governor has requested that school districts not conduct international trips right now this spring. It has been incredibly important to me that we very carefully align our response with the various recommendations from local and state authorities as we prepare for this. We're in the process right now of, communicating with our families of potential international trips. We do have a trip to Spain that was scheduled to go out. I will tell you, and obviously I'm telling the world as well, but we are not going to be holding that trip. We are in the process of working with, to get to families and make sure they're aware of that and have the advisor work directly with travel companies around how to get refunds and the process for that. We do know that that trip required insurance and cancellation insurance, so that aspect of it will be okay. National trips right now, we do not have any recommendation around national trips. However, I am in the process of sending a letter to families who have children going on international or out-of-state trips, but nationally, saying that as of right now, we have not made a decision to cancel those, and we're waiting for guidance. But we know this is an evolving situation, and we want people to be ready in the event that we do need to make alternate plans. Whether those trips are, curtailed, postponed, canceled, we don't yet know what the request might be. But we do want to be mindful of it. We want to be upfront with our families and students about what could be happening. So what I would say is, obviously if for some reason the music group gave us a donation and a trip could not go, we would just refund that donation.
The motion language is in your packet, so.
Move to approve with gratitude.
All those in favor? Any opposed? Any abstentions?
I
Great.
feel like I should abstain since I have a student going on that trip. I don't know if there's a conflict of interest, but
That's fine.
I'll abstain.
All right. Amy abstained. Okay. Subcommittee and member reports. So, school building committee update? Anything there? That's you.
No, I think, school building committee design is continuing to progress. The last meeting, we're into the design of the media center right now, and we're in the process of working through that with the school building committee, seeking feedback on it. We are continuing to be on target with that project. After the school committee voted, we were able to submit the project scope and budget agreement to MSBA. That will trigger the reimbursement process. So even though we now have the bond money into, and we'll have that bond premium, as well as the revenue from the bond in our account, as we go through the process on a monthly basis, we actually get reimbursed from MSBA, which does actually have a positive effect in terms of our revenue stream, because that means we actually can spread out the amount of time we're earning interest on the sale of that bond. So that's a good thing.
Budget? Diane? Yep.
Well, I can't top what was said tonight. When we met, the bond sale hadn't taken place yet, so we talked about what, the hypotheticals were, but also what we would do with the interest on the bond. I don't know if you want to comment on that. I think central office is going to make a recommendation to budget subcommittee, but there was considerable discussion about that.
Yeah, so, what we talked about in budget sub, legally, and Dave, I think, spoke to the committee about this previously, that the interest earned on the bonds, the revenues from the bond sale, technically must go into the general fund. I think it's very, very important, and it's my recommendation that we keep that money with the building project. And so we're working out a mechanism, and this is a school committee decision, but so if you choose to go that route, and we will have that on an agenda coming up, to make that determination. What we would do is have a mechanism essentially to keep that with the building project, so that as we go through this process, when we get to the end of the project, if we have to go into contingency money for the project, then we can actually reduce the district's liability and liability to taxpayers by the amount of the interest that we're able to earn over the life of this project. That, I think, will go a long way in our community toward sending a goodwill message that we're not taking this money and using it unwisely. We're really making sure that building project money and money that's outside of the tax levy stays with this project and reduces future liability and reduces the amount we may need to borrow later. If you remember, just because this is important, the amount that we went to the bond sale with was the total cost of the project minus the contingencies. So that liability still is out there as we go through the project, which would just be a final borrowing, which every district does. But this would be a nice way to reduce that for our taxpayers. I think additionally, it sets a nice tone of good fiscal management for when we do come to the community for a Conant project in the future. It's just, we're really taking care of taxpayers while we're building great schools for kids.
Tessa?
Yep.
So is that just something that would automatically go into a general fund, or would we have to create a stabilization or?
We have the stabilization fund already. There would be some mechanism by which we'd have to put the money in there. We would need to, get the details on what that process looks like to make sure we do it the right way, but we'd come back to you with it.
Use the existing stabilization as opposed to create.
Right, and just have a line item within it that's very clear.
ALJ?
So ALG and FinCom are kind of talking about the same things. Now, the warrant is coming up. So the last ALG meeting took place, so we're really just closing out the year. The Acton FinCom is voting on every warrant, and then but of course they didn't vote on our warrant. I think we're number 6 right now in the Acton warrant. But because we hadn't voted tonight, they postponed their vote to next week. They're meeting weekly right now to go through each warrant article in depth. It's quite interesting process. If you are into that kind of thing, they meet at the ActonTV station. What else do I have for you? I think that's about it.
Go ahead.
What is the general, I saw the minutes, and they talk about the minimum tax.
Yeah, oh, thank you. Yeah, that was the other thing. It just slipped my mind. So everyone's kind of closely watching Minuteman Tech because the assessment's up to $1.7 million. enrollment is way up. I mean, I can't believe it doesn't have something to do with the fact that college is so expensive and people are looking for other routes and other avenues to pursue careers. So it's a concern. It's not going to go down anytime soon. That's the feeling. And so that's just being closely watched at this point. But there's really nothing we can do about it because it's an assessment and we're a member of the district, Acton is.
I kind of just want to get a consensus, how the FinCom and the BOS, Board of Selectmen, what's their kind of feedback on this?
There's overwhelming support. There's also concern about the high per pupil cost of Minuteman right now because the district has lost members as the building project went through and currently. So when the district shrinks like that, the assessments go up. So they're watching it, but there's still very strong consensus that this is an important educational venue, then we need to stick with the district and see it through. They have really excellent programming. They have the lowest teacher-student ratio, one of the lowest, which is probably one of the reasons their costs are high. And they also have a very high special education population, and despite that, the highest MCAS score. So they have a lot going for them. Yes, and a gorgeous new facility. HIT.
The Acton Health Insurance Trust met this morning. Cash flow through 7 months is consistent with a projected loss of $1.3 million for FY20. The projection differs from the cash flow report on DocuShare due to anticipated stop-loss recovery and the 5-week months charged by Blue Cross Blue Shield. The Acton Health Insurance Trust plans were compared with the GIC, the Massachusetts Commonwealth plans, in terms of plan design and cost. On average, GIC costs are increasing 5% next year. Relative to the Acton Health Insurance Trust, GIC plans have more tiering options for services and drugs to incent selection of lower cost providers and drugs. If ABRSD and the town of Acton provided insurance through the GIC, our costs might be higher or lower depending on employee plan selections, and we would lose control over plan design. The consensus of the trustees is that further consideration of moving to GIC is not warranted at this time. Last month, I attended the meeting of the Southeastern Massachusetts Health Group and found it very helpful to compare their discussion and perspective on health insurance with the discussions in our meetings. And so I would, strongly encourage anybody who has time and can go to somebody else's school committee meeting or other groups. It's a very good thing to do.
Yeah.
I was gonna, both are on there. I'll do joint, that's fine, I'll do them both. I went to both of them. The joint PTO met this Monday, and basically we just had a really good conversation about how that's a group that the members of that group, the leaders of all of the PTOs in our district find to be very valuable in terms of a place to share information and also to gain district knowledge. And the CPAC meeting, I've been to 2 of them. Do you want to?
Amanda, every week I think it's a CPAC meeting. I showed up last night, and knowing that it's the second week, and so I really, it's so funny. I can't stop going. I show up every week, whether you have one or not.
Yeah, good.
Their last meeting was February 12th, and they were at the time, and still are, following the special education director search. There was a lengthy discussion at that meeting on the draft recommendations that came out of the dyslexia listening session a few weeks back, which I believe you'll share with the district leadership team if you haven't already. Yeah, and a discussion, a little bit of a discussion on MCAS performance and how vulnerable students with disabilities are. And the need for mandatory special education training and professional development for regular and special education staff and hiring dual certified staff. And then I will just add, just having gone to a meeting of the MASC Special Education Committee on last Thursday, that there is still talk on House Bill 3911, which is an act to ensure representation of special education parent advisory councils on school committees. That is still alive and well and being discussed. So if there's any opinions, maybe that would be an interesting, I don't know, a resolution to compose for next year, if we're for or against, or, just to discuss it and see how we feel about that, because that's not going anywhere soon.
Yes, Paul.
So will we be hearing from CPAC again? Will you be giving your usual debrief at the end of the year kind of thing?
If you invite us. So we will be providing the dyslexia. We're going to talk about our recommendations at our next meeting and approve those as a group, and then we'll present them or share them with the district. As far as the bill, I think we've already weighed in on that issue. We have concerns with how the bill is drafted and being held to the open meeting law obligations of two bodies, not just our own, but yours as well as your ethical guidelines, which are great, but would not allow us to pursue issues once they have been decided by the committee. So there's some language within the bill that we still haven't received answers on, so we're working on that. But
Thanks, Amanda. There are 5 warrants on the agenda now being circulated. Vendor warrants 20-017 in the amount of $1,090,425.03. 20-018 in the amount of $1,935,683.98. 20-018 PR in the amount of $1,030,828.83. Student Activity Fund warrant 20-018 SH in the amount of $20,469.88. And payroll warrant P2018 in the amount of $2,453,515.20. Thank you. Is there anything that you wanted to highlight in the FYI, or we're good? We're good. All right. Is there a motion to adjourn? What's up, Angie?
I would like to spend 2 minutes and in response that I previously don't have opportunity to respond to John's statement.
The statement he made at the beginning of the meeting?
Yeah, because I was trying to raise my hand, but it was skipped.
Well, it wasn't meant to be a discussion because he just wanted to read a statement. He submitted it to me ahead of time.
So I have a 2-minute statement. Can I read that?
Yep.
Okay. So I kind of want to talk about coronavirus because I want to start with a story that's a true story in Wuhan, that this has happened to a nurse and who has the first intact when there's no knowledge about it. And therefore she got it and she went home and her parents got it and her brother got it. And at the end, the whole family diseased. So there is an impact. So I kind of want to bring this up. This is why I have a different perspective in this, with the coronavirus. And this is a developing story. And at this point, so to me, this is not a flu or auto accident. And we have and this virus has the capability of transmitting to another person and the whole family, as the New York case. And with no symptoms, and at this point, there's no vaccine nor too much knowledge about it. So I kind of want to steal Peter's statement, quote earlier, which is, when we solve the problem is how we choose to respond. I see this as a great opportunity that we can engage the community, the town, and the school to work together to reduce the possibility of community spread. So I would like to see a more proactive collaboration between the community, the town, and the school. Thank you.
All right. Was there a motion on it? Was it moved and seconded? Moved.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye.